Have you ever been reading something, whether it be a book or even a Reddit story, and then you read that one line in the story that sends shivers down your spine and everything starts to fall into place? Well, today I have 3 hours of stories just like that for you. So yeah, now's a good time to go get your snacks and a nice comfy blanket, or if you're trying to go get something done, start now. Go get it done. Get up, go. You can do this. I believe in you. Anyways, let's go ahead and get started with the first one. It's from r/no sleep from user Bilbo Cheated. My workplace started a compliment jar. Now no one has any privacy. I don't think I've had any privacy for a few weeks. I work out of a third-party call center that operates out of a long shut-down department store in a walled-off section of a half-shuttered mall. The windows are all boarded up and we have to use the metal doors in the back. We handle customer service for multiple businesses. So one moment I could be helping a woman reboot her Wi-Fi, and the second that call ends, I mean that literally, I'll be helping a man reschedule his refrigerator delivery. If there's one saving grace to this job, it's the variety. For many though, that isn't enough to make up for the fact that we only get a 15-minute lunch and a cumulative 10-minute break time, including bathroom breaks. You want to make sure you use it because it can't be carried over to the next shift, but you get written up for going over the allotted break time. Turnover was so bad that experienced reps were spending more time training new reps than taking calls. Management started calling it a measurable loss of productivity. One coworker of mine, Sharon, sort of acts as our de facto HR. The branch can't even hold a legitimate HR employee, which should tell you a lot. Sharon's a middle-aged woman who used to work in social work, but this unfortunately paid better. A few weeks ago, she took it upon herself to fix the turnover problem. Her solution? A compliment jar where we write nice things about one another, and once a week, Sharon opens and reads them to everyone during the shift. She hoped that it would boost morale and get employees talking to one another outside the confines of work. Everyone groaned at the idea of another task to complete for the week, but she assured us that participation was encouraged, but not at all mandatory. She just wanted everyone's hard work to be seen. At the end of the first week of her new experiment, Sharon gathered us all around and stood behind her desk. She reached her hand into the jar and pulled out the first folded-up strip of paper and read it aloud. Tim is always patient with the assholes. I wasn't really sure who Tim was, and by the squeaking chairs and silence, I don't think many of us did. Someone finally broke the silence with a little clap. No one knew how to act after each compliment was read aloud, but in the end, we resorted to half-assed clapping between compliments like, Alice makes the best coffee in the break room. Thank you, Emma, for fixing my headset. If you need to troubleshoot a TV, you can always count on Blake. People didn't really know how to act when their names were called either. Some stayed in their seats, others stood and gave an awkward wave to the crowd of colleagues. The whole thing seemed performative to me at the time, and I thought this would die out quickly. Sharon always took the jar home with her in the evening. A few days after the first reading, Sharon walked past my desk with the jar tucked under her arm. Bill, how do you think this is going? I looked around at the busy office, and then back to Sharon. Well, no one is crying. She laughed. I know all of this is corny, she said, but people are miserable here. We get screamed at for 8 hours, then we go home and worry about the next day, wondering if anyone would notice if we didn't come back. Management would notice, only if the call queue backs up. You think this will fix that? I asked as I pointed to the jar. There was no way in hell this office could keep that going. She shrugged. Maybe it'll get people to at least look at each other. By the next reading, I thought I was right when the first few were basically just praise for always being on time for work. It looked like the compliments were getting lazier. We had already run out of nice things to say to one another, and we were just grasping at straws to find something to add. Then there was, if you think you're on a tough call, just look over at Josh. That one got a laugh out of me because Josh always seems stressed out of his mind. After that, more ended up being funny. Madison, I love how your chair squeaks in rhythm with the hold music when you need a little break on the line. Sharon seemed so proud because it seemed this initiative was actually going to take off. To her credit, it really did seem like the office was a brighter place. There were more conversations between people on their breaks and just a lighter general mood in the office. Over the next week, I found some of the conversations at work to be extremely awkward, but it was better than before. Anything was better than nothing. On Wednesday, David came up to me while I was getting a cup of coffee that Alice had brewed for everyone. "Are you having to leave home earlier to get here on time?" I finished my sip, cleared my throat, and asked, "I'm sorry?" "I mean, with all that road work on Laurel Street, do you have to leave for work earlier?" Now, I know I didn't tell him where I lived. I only knew his name was David because he had a tag with his name on his cubicle. But the roadwork 2 streets down did delay me, and it was extremely annoying. "Yeah, do you live around there too?" "No, just read about it in the paper." David was a strange guy. Maybe I had mentioned my street before. The third week, Sharon confidently announced the reading of the compliments. As she unfolded the first sliver of paper, she paused, furrowed her brow, and then chuckled before reading. "I'm happy that Alice got her oil changed over the weekend. That sound was really starting to bother me." The regular clapping commenced as Sharon looked up at the crowd. "Is that an inside joke or something?" No one responded, so she continued. "Tim, your son really seemed to enjoy the clown at the birthday party last week. Elizabeth, your stylist was so right to suggest that color. I'm so happy you changed your mind in the chair. Blue curtains were the way to go, Alex. Much better than the green, especially with that rug. We got to talk about the new bedspread, though." Each one, Sharon tried to laugh off. I'm so happy that this has led to some after-hours friendships. Sharon pulled the next slip and hesitated as she skimmed it. She frowned as she stared at the slip, looked up at the crowd in disbelief, and then back at the paper in her hand. "This one is just for me," she said. Annoyed sighs filled the room as she searched for the next compliment. When my name was called, I was jolted to attention. "Bill, I love how you were so careful when you water the tomatoes in your vegetable garden. I think spraying some cayenne pepper in the water will work better than the chicken wire." My fingers became numb and my chest felt hollow. I've never spoken to anyone here about my garden, and I've never posted about it anywhere. At the end of the reading, as everyone was rolling or shuffling back to their cubicles, Sharon tried to raise her voice above the noise. "From now on, let's try to keep these workplace appropriate." On my way home, I checked my mirrors for anyone following me. I checked my fence for cameras or loose boards. Nothing. I monitored the jar this whole week, and I saw no one put in a compliment. But every morning, there are a few more in the jar. I wasn't the only one shaken by an intrusive message. The office has been quieter. People are hiding their phones and closing laptops as others walk by. There's less bathroom traffic, and people are taking fewer breaks than ever before. I even noticed a few people driving different cars to work than I'd remembered. It can't be just one person. I have my suspicions about a few. Of course, there was David. He knew where I lived somehow. Then there was Sharon. She always took the jar home with her. The only other weird conversation was with Ted, who told me that he had thought peppers would grow better in my garden. When I asked if he was the one who left me the compliment, he laughed it off. "No, I just heard about the tomatoes, and I thought we were in more of a pepper climate. That's all." I tried to talk to Alice when I saw her at the vending machine, staring at the rows of snacks, deciding what was going to get her through the rest of the afternoon. "You know this isn't normal, right?" I said. She tapped her card on the machine and began to punch in her numbers. "The compliments," I continued. "You've heard it. The curtains, your oil change, my garden. People are following each other." Her snack fell. As she bent down to retrieve it, she whispered, "Don't." "Don't what?" She stood up and looked at me, her eyes darting to mine and then past me and back. "Don't make people think I'm talking to you about this." "Alice, please," she said, "don't make it worse for me." That afternoon, I caught Blake following me. I pulled into my driveway, parked, and got out of my car. He pulled in and then began to back up like he was just using it to turn around. I motioned for him to roll down his window and yelled, "Blake, what the hell?" He rolled his window an inch as he pulled off and yelled, "I was just trying to find something nice to say." I was dumbfounded. Did he really think that was appropriate? The day before the next reading, I decided to write my first real compliment. I wanted to prove a point. I folded it and dropped it into the jar. Blake, I wrote, I love how determined you are to find compliments, even if you will follow people home to do it. I thought it would be read and everyone would understand how out of hand this has gotten. That night, I got a call from Sharon. Hello? Hey, Bill. She was keeping her voice low. I know you're upset, but you can't start writing stuff like that. Sharon, Blake followed me home. He said he just wanted to find something to put in the jar. This has gotten out of hand. I'm trying to stop this. That's what everyone says. You need to stop this. After a few seconds of silence, Sharon said, I want to, Bill, but the regional office won't let me. They want to implement jars in other locations. Productivity has spiked at our branch, and turnover is almost non-existent. But, Bill, listen, I have the jar at my house, and I'm screening all the slips. You got one. And? It says, Bill, I love how you inspected your fence the other day. It's important to take pride in what we have. I can't remember the rest of the conversation. I just stopped listening to what I was hearing and prepared for the next day. I actually drafted this last night, talking about how I wasn't going to go to readings anymore just to avoid the whole thing, but I decided not to send it. I didn't want to give them anything for today's reading. This morning, I walked into work and everyone was already sitting, chairs pushed together in anticipation like they were pigs at a trough, smiles on their faces. Sharon began with, I asked us to keep things workplace appropriate. I went through all these last night. Other than a few complimenting others on their new cars, I can't read any of these. Some booed, and a few stood and shouted that she was censoring our positivity. Sharon argued for a bit with the crowd and began to step away from the desk. As she did, Madison pulled the jar from her and took Sharon's place. Sharon kept walking out the door. Madison began. You were so brave deleting their number, Emma, even if you did end up putting it back in your phone later on. Josh practiced the best apology in his car before he went inside the apartment. Madison, I think it's so sweet that you still sleep on your husband's side of the bed. Aw, guys, that's so sweet. Thank you for thinking of me, she continued, and I was happy to see we were almost finished. Madison went to put the lid back on the jar. Oops, found a couple of stragglers. Sharon, you were so brave to leave before we were finished. I love how much faith you have in your brakes. Silence. I noticed some people glancing toward the metal doors. Others looked around, taking note of who seemed most uncomfortable. Okay, everyone, last one for the week, Madison said. Bill, I love how you still think strangers can help, even when Sharon can't. Some laughed and cheered, while others simply watched me. I'm not sure if all this time their cheers are for the recipient or for the writer. I'm back home for my shift. I saw a strip of paper caught in my chicken wire. I bent down and grabbed it. Bill, I love how careful you are about locking your door. Most people forget the kitchen window. I looked up at my window and saw the blinds move. I ran inside to find Blake in my kitchen. He looked embarrassed, like I'd caught him stealing copy paper again. Get out of my house. He smiled and said, Your voice carries so well. I stepped towards him, and he stepped towards the door. Excellent posture, he said, very protective of your property. He slipped out the door. As he walked off, he looked over his shoulder and said, See, plenty of nice things to say. I can't decide what to do. I can't get a hold of Sharon. Her phone is going straight to voicemail now. And if anyone from work is here reading this, I guess I should add a compliment. Sharon, thank you for the compliment jar. I know you just wanted to help. Morale has never been higher. Yeah, so some things are really just better left private. Plenty of horrifying secrets being brought to light here. The innocent office tradition that was being shown to us in the beginning of this story wasn't really so innocent. It was actually exposing everyone's deepest thoughts in a very disturbing way. The next story is also from r/NoSleep from user EverBlackDeathMask. My estranged mom asked me to help her move. What I found inside was deeply disturbing. I never had the best relationship with my mom growing up. When people hear that, they usually assume she must have done something horrible. But the truth is a lot more complicated than that. She's not a bad person per se, but rather a victim of circumstance that didn't know how to ask for help. My father walked out on us when I was just 10 years old. I don't remember him leaving. One day he was there, then the next he was gone without a trace. If there was a note or an explanation of some kind, my mom never told me. All that was left behind, according to her, was an insurmountable debt and the uncertainty of raising a child all alone. That kind of pressure is enough to cripple anyone mentally and physically. Unfortunately, my mom was no different. In the years following my dad's departure, my mom found creative ways to remind me that I would amount to nothing like he did. In her drunken stupors, she would hurl insults at me and blame me for her life going down the drain. Wow, guys, Mother of the Year. When I turned 18, I wasted no time packing up the few possessions that I had and getting out of Dodge. For the next 8 years, we didn't reconcile or speak to one another. But all of that changed when my phone lit up with her name last month. I almost declined the call. After all, what exactly did we have to talk about? I wasn't exactly in the mood to deal with whatever baggage she had, but a morbid curiosity got the best of me. "What do you want?" I answered. "Is that how you answer the phone these days?" For you it is. Years of pent-up bitterness poured out of me. Lose my number. I have nothing to say to you. Wait. It sounded like she was choking up. "I'm sorry for everything, Jordan. I was such a terrible mother. You deserved better." The silence that followed was not only awkward, but deserved. How exactly was I supposed to respond to that? Yes, I deserved better treatment, and she could have been better herself, but now that I was older, I understood why she was the way she was. After I had spent an uncomfortable amount of time listening to her cry, I spoke up. "Listen, Mom, I don't want to talk about this right now. I'm busy." "When can we talk about it? Is there ever going to be a good time to talk?" "Not really," I admitted with a sigh. "Work keeps me pretty busy these days. I have my own life to live." "I understand," she sniffled. "Listen, kiddo, I don't have much time left. Cancer is a bitch, and it's taking its toll on me physically. I need your help with downsizing. The house is so full these days. Can you please come by and help me move some things out of the house? I can't reach the basement anymore." I hesitated. Why did she want my help? "Couldn't you hire some movers or something?" "I could, but I want to talk to you. About everything. I'll even pay you." I rolled my eyes at the proposition. "How much?" "How does $500 sound?" $500 was $500. That's money that I couldn't turn down, especially with how dire my financial situation was proving to be, despite all the hours I was putting in at my job. "Okay, I'll help," I caved. "When do you need me to come over?" "Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate the help." I could hear the relief in her voice. "Come by whenever you have a day off. I don't want you to overwork yourself." We exchanged goodbyes, and then I hung up the phone. A few days later, I was driving toward a house that I swore I'd never step foot in again. When I pulled into the driveway, I knew immediately that something was off. The grass on the lawn was well above knee height, and the weeds climbing the siding were nearly vines. Yellowed and fray envelopes overflowed the mailbox. It looked like one more piece of mail would have made it explode. It was odd that the property had been seemingly pushed to the wayside. If she had been able to call me, then surely she could have contacted a neighbor or someone else who could assist her with these things, right? I couldn't help but feel a little guilty. Had it been a mistake to keep her out of my life while her health deteriorated? I grabbed as much of the mail as I could fit into my arms and crossed the jungle that was the front lawn toward the front steps. The steps were an uneven, cracked mess, and I nearly busted my head when I tripped on the second-to-last stair. Thankfully, I was able to use the railing to catch my balance, but the mail scattered everywhere across the front porch area. I rang the doorbell and began picking up the mail. Despite it taking me a considerable amount of time to gather the mail, nobody had answered the door. Weird. I rang the doorbell again. I waited a few minutes, but there was still no answer. My eyes wandered toward one of the windows and noticed that the curtains were drawn. From what I remember, my mom had always been one to let sunlight in, especially when we would deep clean the house on Sundays, so why were the curtains drawn in the middle of the day? Thinking that maybe she had forgotten the time and dozed off, I set the mail down and called her phone. The persistent ringing echoed from the depths of the house. I listened to her phone ring over and over again, but all my calls went unanswered. Growing more concerned, I pounded on the door and called out to her repeatedly. Nothing. Realizing I wasn't getting anywhere, I ventured toward the side of the house. Unlike the front window, the view through the side windows weren't blocked by curtains, but by clutter. From where I stood on the lawn, I could see piles of various items ranging from boxes and newspapers to decades-old furniture and garbage. My heart broke at the sight. "Jesus, Mom, what happened to you?" I muttered, hopping over the rusted, chain-link fence into her backyard. I walked up the stairs to the patio and immediately got chills at what I saw. The back door was cracked open, a couple of inches wide. I approached it and was greeted by a horrendous smell that invaded my nostrils. I audibly gagged and pulled my shirt over my nose to shield it from the malodorous household. Gripping the door with one hand, I shoved the mountain of junk obstructing my path with the other. It took a number of attempts, but eventually it all toppled onto the floor. The gap had widened enough for me to squeeze through. I sidled my way through, my body pressing against more junk as I forced my way inside. The way my feet squelched beneath me made it feel like I was stepping through a field of rotten pumpkins. I had to hold my breath. Even with using my shirt as a makeshift mask, the smell was overwhelming. Years of accumulating mold and spoiled food had transformed my childhood home into a place more akin to a landfill than a home. "Mom?" My voice traveled through the house, but there was still no indication that anybody was home. How could she live like this? The more I wandered through the house, the more bewildered I became. It was hard enough to navigate where I was in the labyrinth of seemingly endless garbage, but the sights were even harder to stomach. In the living room, where my mom had on numerous occasions screamed at me for ruining her life, sat pillars of miscellaneous magazines and newspapers that extended to the ceiling like Jenga towers. In addition to molded food and other than debris, broken glass from no longer operable lamps were scattered across the floor. What made me most nauseous, though, wasn't the narrow pathways from all the junk, or even the couple pounds of hamburger meat infested with flies that was in the kitchen sink. It was the spider webs. They were everywhere. I hate spiders. Ever since I was a kid, they've terrified me. One of my earliest memories was finding a spider on the bathroom floor and having to have my mom kill it with a newspaper. So when I saw the webs go from tiny, membranous piles and corners to being complete, thick tapestries draped across entire pieces of furniture, I nearly left right then and there. But I couldn't leave my mom alone to fend for herself in the stump. "Hey Mom, I'm here." My cracking voice was accompanied by the sound of something skittering on the ceiling. My attention drew upward, and I saw spiders crawling slowly amidst the cracks and exposed beams. Trembling, I moved out from my place in the kitchen to the stairway. Ascending the stairs was not the same effortless task it had been growing up. In fact, it was incredibly difficult. The slippery plastic bags and the random cardboard boxes that adorned nearly every individual step made climbing the stairs feel like an obstacle course from hell. After minutes of cautiously choosing my steps wisely, I made it to the top of the stairs. To the left of me was the door to my mom's room. It was exactly how I remembered it, seemingly untouched by time or filth. I grabbed the doorknob and turned it slowly. I pushed the door, its hinges creaking as it revealed a sight I wasn't expecting. The room was clean. It wasn't spotless, but it was cleaner than the previous areas of the house I had been in. But that wasn't what grabbed my attention. On the other side of the room, sitting in a recliner, was my mom. Buried beneath layers of dust was her figure sitting idly in a reclining chair by the window. "Mom, what's going on?" I crossed the room toward her. The closer I got, the more frail she became. When I nudged her, I thought she would awaken from the nap she had dozed off in, but that's not what happened. I wish that's what would have happened. Instead, her limp body turned to where it faced me, and I nearly screamed. Her eyes were gone. The skin on her face was a discolored mesh of tissue. Her phone was resting on her lap. She was dead. Oh my God. I backed away, tears threatening to fall. Had I been here any earlier, maybe she would still be here. The woman who I had wished would suffer for how she had treated me when I was younger was no longer here. I couldn't take back how I felt, what I said, or what I did. Not now and not ever. All I could do was sit on the bed and cry. I had talked to her earlier that week. I swear I had. If I hadn't talked to her, who would I talk to? Jordan, where are you? It was my mom's voice. Excuse me? I felt a creep chill up my spine. My eyes darted from my mom's body to the doorway. There was no way that the woman whose deceased body I'd seen with my own eyes had called out to me. Honey, I can't find you. The house is so full these days. I didn't answer. I held my breath as I heard noises coming from somewhere downstairs. I pushed myself upright and listened to the mattress springs settle behind me with a muffled series of pops. Inching my way towards the door, I peered around, but didn't see anyone. Jordan, answer me right this instant. The voice had grown irritated. It was the voice I'd been accustomed to associating with my mom for years. Hearing it again filled me with a dread I hadn't felt since childhood. I didn't heed the command. Instead, I stood in the doorway and listened to the voice grow angrier and closer. Don't make me come up there. This time, the voice became more guttural. I covered my mouth to prevent myself from responding. The sound of shifting clutter and scampering up the stairs filled the house. I retreated to the bedroom, but the floor creaked beneath me, giving me away. Jordan, I know where you are. With a nightmarish rhythm, its abdomen swayed as it stalked forward up the stairs. It's been so long since I've seen my boy. Paralyzed, I couldn't move. I could only stare at the clusters of beady, animalistic eyes that reflected back at me. Beneath them was a face I recognized all too well. It was my mom. Her cheeks sagged and stretched around fangs that clicked together and glistened with saliva. Jointed legs sprawled from beneath, twitching at the slightest disturbance of the chitinous shell that trailed behind it. Come give me a kiss. The thing, proclaiming to be my mom, clacked its fangs and advanced toward me with patience. I recoiled and shook my head, refusing to give in to this thing's wishes. Go to hell, I declared, rushing toward the staircase railing and vaulting over. The cardboard boxes beneath broke my landing as a wailing, chittering shriek reverberated from above. With an unsettling fluidity, the monstrous silhouette descended the stairs. I barreled through the garbage on the stairs, frantically scrambling back the way I'd come. You get back here right now, Jordan. I didn't look back. I kept pushing forward through all the junk. The house became more suffocating with every step I took. Piles of trash trapped my shoes and made it disorienting to know where I was. Jordan! My heart thudded against my ribcage as I burst into the kitchen and felt my feet become immediately stuck. I had failed to realize that the surrounding area was engulfed in overlapping layers of webs, wall to wall, cabinet to cabinet, even the floor. The room had become a trap. I jerked and wiggled, but my movements were no use. Elastic and silky webbing clung to my hands like glue. Hysterically, I kept trying to yank myself free, but the more I struggled, the more adhesive it became. Excuse me, little sidebar here, guys. Super unlucky to be terrified of spiders in this situation. Why couldn't the OP have been, scared of heights, or snakes, or taxes? Anyways, let's continue. Above me, I heard it scamper before dropping into view from the ceiling. With a thud, it flexed its legs and carried itself toward me. My mom's face had been consumed entirely by ravenous intent. Got you. The webs around vibrated with every restricted movement I made. I kicked to keep it at bay, but a second later, it lunged. I backed my head away as its fangs snapped inches from my face. The impact sent me to the floor, and I felt my body sink deeper into the lattice of webbing around me. Panic coursed through me as I struggled, but the silk clung to my clothes and skin. It pulled me down like a fish being reeled in. The creature adjusted its position and stared down at me with longing and hunger. Jordan, Mom has missed you so much. The voice rumbled through the silk. The fangs lowered themselves toward me with an eager precision, but before they could connect, I used what remaining strength I had to pull my hands up and defend my face. They sliced through the webbing, allowing me to free my hands. I kicked and pushed the creature off me. My newfound freedom allowed me to grab a nearby piece of glass from the door. Turning to face it once more, I stabbed it into the closest eye. With a horrific shriek of pain, it darted toward the wall and retreated up along it. "Jordan, how dare you treat your mother this way, you unappreciative brat!" My legs burned with adrenaline as I struggled against the sticky webbing and hurried toward the back door. It was still cracked from earlier, but I would have to push my way through the same garbage. Not even bothering to look back, I threw myself into the gap shoulder first and powered my way through. I moved as quickly as I could, scraping my skin against the piles and tearing the last strands of webbing clinging to my body. Sunlight peeked through the other side like a beacon of hope, but before I could reach it, something gripped my shoe. I turned to see my mom holding on tightly with her fangs, desperate to drag me back into the house. "Let go," I pleaded as I kicked repeatedly. My foot squished with every blow that struck an eye or some part of her. A resounding crack filled the air as my foot connected with a fang. "Get back here," she screamed. I stumbled out onto the back steps and ran faster than I ever have in my entire life toward the fence. After scaling it, I bolted toward my car, hopped into the driver's side, and floored it out of the neighborhood. I never went back. I'm not sure how long I drove for, but when the adrenaline had worn off, I pulled into the parking lot of a grocery store and called 911. The police were hesitant to come check it out initially, but they eventually relented. They found my mom's body in the webs, but they never found the monster wearing my mom's face. That's something I don't really like to think about for too long. What I do think about is the moment I opened that door and saw my lifeless mother sitting in that chair. I don't know how long she sat there for or how much pain she was in. All I know is that she died alone and I wasn't there. I can't change that. People talk about her now like she was nothing more than a hoarder, but I don't think about the house when I think about her. I just think of my mom. This one had an insane discovery in it. It was definitely horrifying. The OP's mom had already died, and something in the house, in the OP's mom's house, had been using her voice and appearance to lure him inside, which is insane. This story tries to trick you into thinking it's going to be about regret and reconnecting with family. Instead, the OP discovers he was talking to a weird spider creature. The next one's from r/NoSleep from user NoCardiologist1353. My father left me one rule: keep water by the bed. I'm scared to go home. In fact, I don't think I will ever return. I don't care that everything I own is there, or even that it's my childhood home. I'm never going back. It was only a few months ago that I received the call that would change my life. I sat in my dorm, studying for my psychology exam, when the monotone chirping of my phone broke through the tranquil silence. "Hello?" I answered blankly. "Yes, am I speaking to Aaron?" A thick, masculine voice broke through the speaker. Yeah, it is. Who am I speaking to?" "Well, ma'am, I'm Sheriff Watterson from back in Centerville. Your father is Roger, correct?" My voice cracked as I whispered, "Yes, is everything okay?" A heavy, pained sigh came through the phone. Dad's funeral was harder than Mom's. Mom's was a long time coming. The cancer had pillaged her body for years. It laughed with glee as it poisoned her blood and left her a hollow husk months before her final breath. But Dad drowned. Not in a lake, not in a pool, in his own home. They told me he fell asleep in the bathtub. 3 days after the sheriff's call, I stood in the small, traditional Wesleyan chapel. As I stood in front of the simple casket, wrapped in a black dress, I realized I was now an orphan. Later that evening, Dad's lawyer sat me down to walk me through the last will and testament. I sat there on the couch in a grief-induced shock. The legal jargon spouted from the lawyer overwhelmed me like a flood. Very few of his words reached my mind, but one of his final statements broke through my stupor. "And finally, your father has left you the entirety of his estate, including the house." "Wait, what did you say?" I asked the lawyer. "Your father left you the house, as well as the majority of his earthly possessions," he replied, as if it was the most mundane statement ever. "Oh," was all I could muster. "Also, your father left you this," he said, as he handed me a small, simple envelope that bore my name. "Thanks," I said as I stuffed it into my purse. Days passed filled with casseroles, hugs, and sloppy signatures on legal documents. Several members of the family advised that I sell the house to pay for my schooling. But how could I? How could I sell the first and only home my parents ever bought? How could I sell the home that my childhood held? Instead, I kept it. I transferred to an online program, and before long, I found myself moving the few boxes from my dorm into the house that was now mine. A few short weeks later, I found myself alone in the house for the first time since Dad died. No one tells you how loud it is after the funeral, nor how quiet it is after everyone leaves. The silence brought to mind every good memory of my dad, though they were tainted by loss. There would be no new memories shared, no happy hugs as I graduated college, no tearful laughter as he walked me down the aisle. I had every memory of my dad that I would ever have, and as I grew older, they would fade, eventually disappearing altogether. Then my dad would truly be gone. As gentle tears ran down my cheeks, a memory of a note hidden in my purse came to mind. Grabbing my purse, I fished out the letter that bore my name in my father's shaky yet elegant handwriting. A single tear dampened the envelope as I gently opened the letter. My heart awaited eagerly for the wisdom it may contain, yet to my surprise, it only had one single sentence. Always keep a glass of water on the nightstand. I don't know how long I stared at that lone sentence, but as I did, anger boiled up within me, and before long, I screamed. That's it? That's the best damn advice you could think of? Gee, thanks, Dad. I'll always be hydrated at night. How about, I love you, or I'm proud of you? I screamed at an empty house as I slid to the ground and wept. Why did you have to go? Why did you leave me? Side note, guys, that's such a dad thing to do, like to make sure you're hydrated. Anyways, let me continue. That night, I got drunk. A cocktail of anger and grief fueled my drive to the local liquor, where I bought enough booze to supply any frat house for a week. After several bouts with Jack Daniels, I finally collapsed on my bed in a drunken stupor. It was around 3 a.m. when I coughed and gagged myself awake. It felt like my lungs were full of water. I sat up quickly, fearful that I was choking on my own vomit, but as I lurched upward, the feeling passed. My airway opened and I greedily sucked in as much air as I could. My hands shook uncontrollably as I tried to calm down. Standing up, I walked into the master bathroom and bent to the sink to splash some cold water on my face. Glancing up, I saw my sorry reflection in the mirror, and for a moment in the reflection, I saw movement. It was slight, but there in the reflection of the gaping darkness that was the doorway to my room was movement. The kind of movement your eyes notice a second too late. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as the implications reached me. Slowly, I turned and faced the dark void that used to be my bedroom. Armed only with a hairbrush, I cautiously entered the room. "Hello?" I said, trying to disguise the fear in my voice. "Is someone there?" The room was empty. No one was there, and I soon turned my attention to the door to the hallway. Peeking my head into the hall, I looked down both ways, and as I did, from behind me I heard the gentle trickle of water. My journey back to the bathroom felt like it took hours. I kept expecting something to touch me from the dark, but soon I stood fully in the low white light of the bathroom. Before me was the sink. A thin stream of water flowed from the faucet. My mind offered dozens of explanations, but the one I settled on was that in my fear, I failed to fully turn off the faucet and didn't notice until my terror had passed. "It's nothing, just the alcohol," I whispered aloud to myself as I locked the bedroom door and returned to bed. The next morning, I awoke in a strange mix of groggy exhaustion and quiet hope. I found myself somewhat embarrassed about the night before, both the drinking and the fear. And though I was still grieving, I told myself I wasn't going to be controlled by the loss anymore. That morning, I started to unpack and clean. The work was good for me. It kept my mind from dwelling on the loss. Soon, I started back on my studies, which brought me some enjoyment. For the first time in days, I felt hungry. So, I walked a few blocks down to the pizza place, the same one I worked at in high school. Billy, the owner, greeted me warmly with a hug as he told me how sorry he was for my loss. "Thanks, Billy. That means a lot," I replied. "We love you, kiddo, and you always got a job here if you want it." I smiled. "If you're serious, yeah, that would actually be great. I could really use a distraction right now." He nodded. Start whenever you're ready. We'll take you anytime. How's tomorrow sound? He patted my back. Tomorrow is great. A few moments later, my large pepperoni pizza was ready. As Billy handed it to me, he said, "On the house, kiddo. It's the least we could do." I thanked him and carried my dinner back home. I wish I could say that night was normal. What I thought was just a drunken reaction to grief turned out to be something greater. Every night that week, at 3 a.m., I woke feeling like I was drowning. Every night, the feeling grew more intense and lasted longer than the night before. After a full week of restless sleep, I couldn't take it anymore. Not knowing what else to do, I emailed one of my professors and asked if we could schedule a video call. Dr. Martin was one of my favorite professors. He warmly encouraged my desires to become a psychologist, and after some small talk, I opened up to him. I told him about my father's death, how he had drowned. I told him about my nightmares and the terror I felt as my lungs filled with imaginary water. All the while, he listened attentively. As my account came to an end, Dr. Martin stared intently into the camera, clearly deep in thought. A moment later, he spoke. "Honestly, Aaron, it sounds a lot like grief-triggered sleep paralysis." "Sleep paralysis?" I echoed. "Yes, it seems to be that your subconscious has taken this grief and internalized it in the form of a paralysis experience that mimics the final moments of your father." I stared for a moment as this news sunk in. "Well, is there anything that would help?" I asked. "Well, if you're wanting to go the medication route, I'd have to refer you to someone. But if you'd ask me, medication might not be necessary. Perhaps all your mind needs is some form of closure." I thought for a moment, before nodding. "Thank you, doctor. You've been really helpful." "Of course, Aaron. Happy to help." Closing my laptop, I sat there at the end of my bed, trying my best to digest what I had just been told. What would closure even look like? Moments later, it hit me. The note. The stupid one-sentence note my dad had left. The note that was currently hiding in the back of my junk drawer. Soon, I found myself staring at the wrinkled piece of paper. All it said was, "Always keep a glass of water on the nightstand." Why would he write this? The thought bounced around my mind over and over again. But ultimately, it doesn't matter. If listening to the note would give my mind closure, I'd do whatever it said. That night before bed, I set a tall glass of clear water on my nightstand. I stared at the cup as my eyelids grew heavy, and soon I was fast asleep. I woke in the morning shocked. Not only had I slept all the way through the night, but it was some of the most restful sleep I've ever had. I felt relaxed and energized, ready for the day ahead. My smile rarely left my face all day. Later that afternoon, Billy remarked, "You're in a good mood today, Aaron. Glad to see it." I chuckled slightly. Yeah, it finally feels like I can move on with my life. He smiled and nodded as we got back to work. That night, I dumped out the glass and filled it to the brim with fresh water. Hopping into bed, I silently hoped that that night would be just as good as the night before. Again, morning came, and with it, the renewed energy of a restful night. I woke with a smile on my face, but out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something was different. It was the glass. It was half full. I stared at it for a moment. I vividly remember feeling it full last night, but now it wasn't full. It took a moment to convince myself that I had just taken a drink in the middle of the night and simply didn't remember. "Weird," I said aloud as I forced a shrug. Despite my efforts, a feeling of unease stuck with me all day. The day itself wasn't a blur. I couldn't tell you one thing about that day. Only that I'd spent every moment of it wondering what happened to the water. Again, evening came, and I found myself filling the same glass with fresh water. As I set it on the nightstand, I took a moment to note the exact amount of water that the glass held. It took longer to fall asleep that night, but eventually sleep took me. Again, I awoke refreshed and happy. But it only lasted a moment as I looked to the nightstand and saw that the glass was a little more than half full. Definitely less than the night before. That day, my mind was consumed by one thing: the water. Did I drink it and I just don't remember? I must have, but why don't I remember? Where else could the water have gone? "Everything okay, kiddo?" Billy's voice broke through my questions. "Oh, yeah, sorry. I just got a lot on my mind." "Well, if you need to talk about anything, just say so." I nodded as I tried to distract myself with work. That night, I had an idea. After filling the glass, I took a red marker and marked the water line. In the morning, there would no doubt be about how much water I'd put in. The next morning, the glass was completely empty. In a fit of anger and fear, I threw the glass across the room. It shattered as it hit the wall. Bro, why is this person so mad? They just got a thirsty ghost in their house. Why not try putting out like some Kool-Aid or something? I don't know. Give the ghost something other than water. Anyways, let's continue. What the hell is going on? I screamed at the empty house. That afternoon, as I walked to work, I realized that before I overreacted, I needed to be sure that I wasn't drinking the water. For all I knew, I could have been sleepwalking. If I could see that I was drinking the water, that would put an end to it. I knew my phone wouldn't record all night, and I didn't have time today to drive to the city over and purchase a security camera. So, if I couldn't record video, maybe I could record audio. I often used a voice memo app to record college lectures to help me with studying, and I knew that there wasn't a limit to how long the app would record. By the time I walked into the pizza parlor, I had already decided. Tonight, I would record everything. As night fell, I made another decision. I decided to fill 4 glasses instead of 1. If it turned out that this was just me guzzling water while sleepwalking, 4 glasses of water would certainly cause me to have to use the bathroom, and the discomfort would wake me. And so, with 4 glasses of water on the nightstand, and my phone recording every noise in the room, it didn't take long for me to fall asleep. Side note, I love that the author did this. They made the author use psychology on herself. That's really cool. As consciousness returned in the morning, I quickly turned to the nightstand, and a cold chill ran through my body as I see 4 empty glasses. It's a thirsty ghost. With a sweaty hand, I picked up my phone and began to play back the 8-hour recording. The first few hours, no sound other than my light snoring was heard. I sped up the playback even more, till around 3 a.m., when suddenly a new sound came across the phone. It was a startling sound, the type of sound only heavy inhaling of water can create. It sounded like a thirsty horse was violently lapping water from a drinking trough. It lasted about 30 seconds, and as quickly as it came, it was gone. The rest of the recording was just my snoring. I was horrified. That couldn't have been me. I couldn't have made those sounds, but I dared not consider the other option. The option that said something else was drinking the water. I hadn't heard any footsteps, no other breathing, nothing, just the unhuman lapping of water. I had no other choice. Hearing wasn't enough. I needed to see what was going on. I called Billy and called off my shift that afternoon. I told him I was sick. He wished me a quick recovery. Not long after, I hopped into my car and headed out to buy a camera. Centerville wasn't big enough to have any stores that sold the type of camera I needed. The nearest store that did was 45 minutes away. I walked into the store and quickly found the tech section. The young man behind the help desk looked up as I approached. With a grin, he said, "Hi, can I help you?" Yeah, you can," I quickly replied. "I'm looking for a home security camera that has night vision and I can access from my phone." "Sure, we got a few options right over there if you want to follow me." Out of 4 options, I chose the cheapest. "That's a good model," he said. "The camera app will work as long as your phone has Wi-Fi." "Great," I replied. After the employee walked me through the setup progression and user functions, I returned to my car and headed home. As my father's house came into view, I was startled by how foreign it felt to me. It was no longer the home that protected me as a child. It was no longer the home that filled my mind with good memories and peace. Instead, it was some twisted version of that place. I wanted to leave and never come back. I really did. It was the house that killed my father, but if I left, then Dad was really gone. As I entered, I felt nothing. No love, no nostalgia, no comfort, only fear. I set up the camera as quickly as I could. I couldn't stand being in the bedroom anymore. The only thing that kept me going was the desire to know the truth. After setting up the camera and ensuring it was connected to my phone, I walked down to the local pharmacy. I walked into the small, dusty place illuminated by dim fluorescent lights that emitted a flittering green glow. It didn't take long to find the sleeping pills that I was looking for. I doubted I could have fallen asleep on my own that night. Some help would be nice. A frail old man stood behind the counter and offered me a gummy grin as I walked up. "Hello, young lady. Find everything you need?" Yes, sir, thank you. He looked at the pills as he put them in a small bag. Trouble sleeping, ma'am? With a nod, I said, yeah, I guess you could say that. Well, hopefully these will help. Take care now. You too, I said as I walked out. Night fell. With shaking hands, I filled a glass to the brim with water. Checked one more time that the camera was working and facing both the bed and nightstand, and took my 2 pills. My heart beat fast as I climbed into bed, and with a sigh, I turned off the lamp. Morning came, and I can honestly say it was the best night of sleep I've ever had. With a stretch and a yawn, I rose from the bed, happy and ready for the day. But it took only one glance at the empty cup for all the fear and dread to fall back onto my shoulders. I didn't even bother to change out of my pajamas, as I grabbed my phone and walked out onto the porch. After connecting to the camera, I saw my room at 11:30 the night before. The camera's infrared illuminated my room with an eerie white and gray glow. I watched myself sleep at 3 times speed, and between 11:30 and 3 a.m., nothing happened. The room was quiet and peaceful. But what I saw at 3:01 took the breath right out of my lungs. From beneath my bed crawled a form as quietly and smoothly as fog sliding over mountain tops. It was impossibly tall. When it finally stood, it had to bend over, for its head and shoulders rested against the ceiling. Its back, which faced the camera, was damp and disgustingly thin. Every vertebra of its spine was visible. Its arms reached below its knees. It didn't move like a predator in a hurry. It moved like something that already owned the room. The thing slowly reached for the glass of water, which looked tiny in its massive hands. It raised the cup to its lips and loudly sucked the water down, and after it finished, its neck turned its head to me, as I slept peacefully in my bed. As it stared at me sleeping, it raised a hand and gently ran its fingers through my hair, and eventually down the side of my face, where one of its claws pressed against my cheek hard enough to break the skin. At this, I began to stir. I mumbled for a moment, then my sleeping mouth spoke the words. "Dad, is that you?" The creature stared at me. Then its body shook with wet, choking laughter. And then, with a creaked, unhuman voice, it replied mockingly, "Yes, it's me. I missed you so much, Dad." It then bent over and kissed my forehead before silently slinking back under the bed. I couldn't breathe. My stomach churned as I stumbled off the porch and into the yard. I couldn't make myself look back at the house. I just wanted to get away, to put as many miles between me and that thing as possible. So I got in my car and drove. I'm hours away now, writing this from a hotel room in another state. I'm never going back. I think it knows I left. I've been watching the camera feed, and 30 minutes ago, it crawled out from under the bed. Since then, it hasn't moved. Its eyes have been locked on the camera the entire time. They're horrible eyes, pure black with tiny white pupils. It hasn't blinked once. It's getting late now. I don't want to go to sleep. I'm afraid I'll drown. If only it could have been, my father left me one rule: keep water by the bed, in case you get thirsty at night. Yeah, no, there's a creature under your bed that gets thirsty. That's what it is. The next one's from r/no sleep from Saturday. We shrink wrap our dead. One of my earliest memories are from a funeral. At the time, I didn't understand that it was a funeral. It's a confusing thought. I wasn't scared or sad. It was just a lot of people that I knew gathered in one room. A lot of them were upset. That much I remember. But there was something else. There was a man in the room, resting on a big table. There was an older woman in a robe, talking to us in a soft tone. At some point, my mother picked me up, and we walked to the man on the table. He was being wrapped in plastic. I cried, and my mother rocked me in her arms. I didn't understand that the man was dead, but how could I? I'd never seen anything die. A couple of the older kids were given blow dryers to help shrink the plastic. My mother put me down while she helped turn the body to get the wrapping right. I retreated to the end of the table, where I played with my favorite Ninja Turtle toy. When no one was looking, I pricked a hole in the plastic, just between the man's toes. It was an accident. I was playing, and the toy had a sharp edge. I was a bit embarrassed, so I didn't say anything. We all sat there for hours, singing songs and talking in hushed voices. The old woman in the robe was so kind and careful. I remember her stroking my hair and kissing me on the cheek. All the children of the town were there, both the infants and the teenagers. They didn't want us to sleep, but we couldn't help it. They gave us candy to keep us motivated, but I still nodded off. I was barely awake when I heard the noise. I remember the plastic turning this thick, ink-like black. Then something slipped out, right there in that hole I poked between his toes. Something moved. I remember drawing in a cold breath that made me choke. It was so cold that I could feel something crystallizing down my throat. My voice burned and my heart kept beating louder and louder. I didn't understand what was happening. The last thing I remember from that day was the kind old woman screaming at two men to hold me down as she hurried to me with a bone saw and an apologetic expression. Next thing I remember, I was in the hospital. It wasn't that bad. Getting fed through a tube in your arm is weird, but I got so many toys and comics from that day that it felt like Christmas all over. I had aches and pains, but they passed. Once I was okay, my parents sent me to live with my aunt in a neighboring town. I didn't like it, but they painted it as this great opportunity and a chance to meet new friends. They said it was temporary, and I believed them. I hadn't met enough liars to know the signs. That temporary solution lasted all through my childhood. My aunt's a wonderful woman, and how she managed to care for not only me, but my two cousins is beyond me. My parents would send her money, but they would never come to visit. We never talked about them, and when they passed in the winter of 2016, I wasn't told until long after their funeral. I can't say I miss them. I wish I could, but I can't. After high school, I decided to pursue a degree in anthropology. I don't want to attribute all my interest to that first memory, but I can't say it didn't have an impact on me. I had no idea why our burial ritual had been so strange compared to anything I've read. We bury our dead in coffins, in the ground, and cremate them. We don't shrink wrap them in front of an audience. For the longest time, I thought it was something I made up. A bad dream brought on by a nasty fever, but the more I thought about it, the more I had to know for sure. While studying for my master's degree, I decided I was going to write a paper about this custom. That is, if it was real to begin with. I had a couple of other topics lined up just in case. I asked my aunt about it. She wasn't too happy talking about the topic, as it brought up bad memories of my parents. She asked me to consider other ideas. However, I took note of something interesting. She never disputed the fact that the shrink wrapping was real. She would mention how that town wasn't a big deal and how it wasn't noteworthy. But she never said I was wrong. Side note, guys, how many rolls of cling wrap do you think it would take to wrap up a body? They had to drop at least a couple $100 on the stuff, right? Anyways, let's continue. The village is in rural South Dakota. If you follow the Runalong River, past the town of Hilltop and the wheat farms, and far enough to the northwest, there's a hillside community with about 550 people. Not a lot of folks choose to settle there as the place has spotty wireless and the roads have barely been maintained since the 70s. You'd be excused for not knowing it existed. Most people just notice their Wi-Fi going bad as they drive past. Those who live up there are mostly retirees, but there's a couple who make their living doing seasonal jobs for surrounding farms and ranchers. There's a grocery shop, a couple of truck drivers, and a church. If you follow the main road, you get to a bus stop. There's a preschool, but not a lot of children. Despite my aunt's disinterest, I decided to pursue this topic. I called up the village priest. The one I remembered was already an old woman, so I figured there'd be someone else attending the flock. Turns out, I was right. I got in touch with a man named Pastor Oswald. He picked up before the second dial tone. I was sitting in my car at the time, holding my phone with my cheek as I scribbled in my notebook. "Pastor Oswald," I asked. "Hope I got the right number." "Sorry, I don't get a lot of calls," he laughed. "Who am I speaking to?" I introduced myself as a master's student in anthropology and explained my interest in their burial rites. I didn't bring up the details of my past, thinking this person probably didn't know about me either way. I explained how I was there to interview and observe, for academic purposes. Pastor Oswald waved it off. "No problem at all," he assured me. "We have a ceremony scheduled 2 days from now that you're welcome to attend. Respectfully, of course." How could I say no? I drove out there on the day of the ceremony. I was told it would be held later in the evening, so I had plenty of time to make myself reacquainted with the town. I took a detour off the highway and noticed my internet connection going spotty, so I knew it wasn't far. There was something familiar about the smell. It's strange how well something that small sticks with us. Just from taking a deep breath, I could tell I'd been there before. Springtime never really changes. It was just that time of year when it's still uncomfortably cold, but the sun shines so brightly it stings your eyes. Where a warm jacket is too much, but leaving it at home is too little. That in-between space where nature stays by the door like a cat, meowing at you to open, but not knowing if it wants to leave. I found the bus stop and subsequently the road leading into town. I don't think I've ever seen a more beaten up patch of asphalt. There had to be some other way for trucks to get up there that I didn't know about. I could hear my insurance premiums cry as the shock absorbers struggled to keep pace. The town church was a classic white with a small turn-of-the-century Midwestern bell tower. I couldn't see the bell, though. There were a couple of cars parked outside, but no one seemed to be around. I knocked a couple of times on the big double doors, but no one answered. I figured I'd give Pastor Oswald a call, but I couldn't get a signal through. It was the middle of the day, but there were a couple of people milling about, mostly older folks walking their dogs or buying groceries. Out of all the people that passed by, 3 of them were under the age of 60, and they might just have appeared younger than they really were. The grocery store had a bit of a cafe corner where you could sit down to have a sandwich. It wasn't so much a coffee place as it was a collection of chairs scattered around a handful of wobbly tables, with a couple of handwritten signs showing the price of drinks. It looked way too cheap, but that's probably because they hadn't adjusted for the past 6 years of inflation. I grabbed a seat by the window, looking out over an abandoned street. A couple of crows had made their way into a trash can and threw garbage out like there was no tomorrow. They looked like they knew what they were doing. More young birds than there were young people. As I sat down for lunch, a peculiar man walked in. He was in his early 50s, with a shaved head and a 5 o'clock shade lining his jaw. Bit of a beer belly, but he had these really clear green eyes. He gave me a long look, stopped, and circled back. He pointed a finger at me and cocked his head. "I know you," he stated. "How do I know you?" "I don't think you know me," I said. "Sorry." "Now hold on." He sat down across from me, still thinking out loud. Then, pointing again, he started listing names. My mother, my father, my aunt, a couple of my cousins. Then something clicked. He snapped his fingers. "Don't tell me," he said. "You're Henry's kid." "Got me there," I admitted. "You see the family resemblance?" "Don't you?" I raised an eyebrow at that. He looked at me like I was an idiot. "Jerry. Uncle Jerry. Dad's brother?" "I never heard of an Uncle Jerry." "Figures." He reached out a hand. I was hesitant at first, but he had a genuine smile. That, and he had managed to list a whole bunch of names from my family, some of which I barely remembered myself. He was the real deal in one way or another. I shook his hand as he started firing off a bunch of questions. We had a lot of catching up to do. We spoke for hours. He was pleasant to talk to, and the more I looked, the more of myself I could see in him. We had the same ears, for example, and the same space between our front teeth. I told him about my studies and the peculiar memory of the shrink wrapping. He perked up at that. "They still do that," he said. "It's the strangest thing." "You know what it's about?" "Yeah, I'm surprised you don't. Given the circumstance, you know." "What are you talking about?" I sipped my coffee as he gave me a curious look. He crossed his arms and leaned back in his seat. "They call it Good Friday lung. You had it as a kid, don't you remember?" Good Friday lung was a condition brought on by something in the soil. They didn't have an explanation for it, but it was something that occurred at about 3 to 5 days of decomposition. A person who died would exude this black smoke that made people sick. Apparently, that's something I got when I was younger. That would explain my memory. Burying them just makes it spread through the soil. Gets sucked up in the groundwater and the crops. Dangerous stuff. What about cremation? Burning them spreads it faster. It gets in the air like a cloud. A whole bunch of people died from that at the turn of the century, according to the church records. What about acid? Liquidation? Might work, but that'd be expensive as hell. You can't just get industrial-grade body-burning acid at a moment's notice. So yeah, We shrink wrap. Simple. I got to see it for myself. Well, you'll get to. Old Harlan passed a couple days ago. Sad to see the stuttering old fool go, but Jerry shrugged. That's life. I'd never heard of Good Friday lung. It sounded ridiculous. Apparently, it was some kind of aerial infection that affected people who'd lived in that town too long. They tried several techniques over the years, but shrink wrapping was the simplest and most cost-effective way to prevent any harm from spreading. It didn't quite explain everything. For example, why did they gather all the children at the ceremony? It seemed ill-advised to bring all the young to witness something so macabre. What Jerry had shared was a start, but it didn't quite paint the full picture. I'd never heard of anything like this, and yet they all accepted it like it was a part of everyday life. My estranged uncle was supportive of my research into the subject, albeit a bit less helpful than he might have wanted to be. For example, he had no idea where the condition originated. Apparently, it was just part of living by the river. Later that evening, people gathered at the church. Jerry was supposed to meet up with me a little later, so this was my chance to talk to Pastor Oswald and get a bit of history. The double doors were wide open, and a group of 24 people had already gathered. And there, on a stone altar at the very front, was an old dead man, as naked as the day he was born. Pastor Oswald spotted me across the room. Compared to most people living there, he was relatively young, only 40 or so years old. He had these big glasses and an aw shucks kind of demeanor to him. I can imagine exactly what this guy looks like based on that. That's funny. I could easily see him as someone willing to geek out at some kind of convention. He shook my hand and invited me in. Glad to see a new face, he said. These are trying times, but it's important to challenge perspectives. I hope I'm not interrupting. Just don't touch anything and you'll be fine. He showed me around the room and introduced me. There were 2 men by the back that were supposed to transport the body after the ceremony, locking it in a crypt. There were a couple of volunteers helping with the plastic wrapping and turning the body. Then there were the children. As part of the ceremony, about a dozen children were there to help out. Most of them were given blow dryers to help the plastic shrink in this vacuum-tight seal. I had a couple of questions about that. Is there a particular reason why you're involving the children? I asked. They're most susceptible to the condition, he explained. If someone gets sick, we need to know right away. That's why it's best to keep everyone around until we know the seal will hold. Involving them in the ceremony keeps them close and occupied. Then why not keep them in the back or the other room? Then we can't immediately see if they get affected. They also get impatient from the waiting. Then why are there no paramedics around, or doctors, maybe gas masks, or... It's not that kind of condition. While Pastor Oswald still smiled, I could tell there was something in my line of questioning that poked a nerve. I slowed down, brought out my notebook, and took it one question at a time. Then what kind of condition is it? Pastor Oswald mulled the question over as he double-checked his equipment. There was a veil that was supposed to go over the body once the ceremony was complete. There was a wheeled gurney to roll the body out, to be sealed in a communal crypt. Those things I expected, but what bothered me was the table with instruments and songs, flutes and tambourines, child-sized. We've had a lot of people trying to fix it over the years, he explained. They can't find a source. They can't even tell if you have it or not. It's not until the moment you lay dead and the decay sets in that the condition reveals itself. And by then, you want them contained. Exactly, he nodded. But as far as prevention goes, or the source of the contamination, your guess is as good as mine. I just know that it's been here a long time, and it'll probably be here long after you and I are gone. Then why not just move? Well, if you have it, you'll just be bringing it somewhere else. A lot of folks don't want to take that chance, so they've decided to stick around. But as you might have noticed, there's a lot less people living here than there used to be. So in a generation or two, who knows? He handed me a small bowl full of wrapped chocolate mints. I took one and smiled as he hurried off to help an older man with a walker. The ceremony started at about 9 p.m. Most people sat down in the pews, but the children were sat up front by the altar. Pastor Oswald spoke in a very calm and reassuring tone. He explained it as a blessing, a challenge of faith, to be overcome. In these trying modern times, we often forget about the imperceptible things that shape our lives. Things like the way the wind carries our breath, how the moon shines through our window when the power goes out, How faith lifts us out of bed to carry our burdens. But men like Harlan know of these things. They know them well. It was a beautiful speech. I remembered to take notes, but I was a bit distracted. I didn't even notice Uncle Jerry sneaking in to sit at my side. I was about to say something to him when he raised a finger to his lips, showing me I ought to stay quiet. Pastor Oswald painted this ceremony as a reassurance of faith, that we're willing to do what we must in order to retain the natural order of things, that we must not let Harlan be remembered as something harmful to the community. The ceremony was explained as tying a final ribbon on a life well lived. There were a lot of songs and hymns, some which I'd heard before, some not. Jerry seemed to know all of them by heart. Some kids helped out by playing simple instruments or tapping their feet. There was an older woman playing the church organ. Pastor Oswald had a surprisingly strong voice. Harlan's widow described her husband's love for the outdoors and how he loved to take moonlight walks by wheat fields. She urged everyone to take the scenic route home that night, as it was a full moon, to maybe get a sense of what he appreciated so much about the open sky. It was a nice thought, and I could see more than a few tears among the audience. Her jab about his chain smoking got a couple of laughs too. As the ceremony neared midnight, the children were asked to come up to the plastic-wrapped body with their blow dryers. As the machines began to whir, I could hear the plastic creak as the wrap tightened. It didn't take long. All of a sudden, the man on the altar had gone from a person to a package, anonymous and generic. As the songs continued, I noticed a shift in the room. The plastic was slowly turning gray, and the two men who were charged with moving the body were on high alert, but not towards the body. They were looking at the congregation, the children in particular. The parents were too. It's like no one was really watching the dead body in the room. Something was changing. As the plastic turned completely black, everyone seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The plastic seal seemed to hold. Pastor Oswald cheered, and the congregation cheered with him as they celebrated and gave thanks. The body was carefully moved to the wheeled gurney and covered in a thin veil. The two men wheeled the body out, and I got up to follow them. Pastor Oswald stopped me with a hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, but you can't come with them. It's a safety measure." "Not even from a distance?" He rolled his eyes a little and looked around the room. One of the kids was pulling on his sleeve, demanding his attention. "All right, from a distance," he agreed. "Just don't touch anything, you understand? I'll keep my distance." He mouthed a silent thank you as he diverted his attention to a young boy wanting to show off his tambourine skills. Most of the children were being taken home. The ritual was over. I followed the two men outside. There were no graves, only mausoleums. The men stopped as they realized I was following, but I assured them I'd keep my distance. They nodded at that and continued rolling the body down a path. The wheels on the gurney struggled against the gravel. They were in the middle of a casual conversation, not really related to anything. Perhaps this was a bit of routine for them. Given the average age of those who lived there, that wouldn't surprise me. They were discussing one of them buying a new car from a less than reputable dealer and the pros and cons of such an investment. Halfway down the line of mausoleums, they stopped. Turns out they'd messed up the number and taken a wrong turn. They had to backtrack and go around. It was a bit of a hassle, so before they did, they decided to go on a smoke break. As promised, I kept my distance as they left the body on the table. There was no wind and the gurney was steady. There was no harm to it. I joined them in their discussion, trying not to impose. I asked a couple of practical questions about the ceremony and the history of their role. I made a couple of notes about how they were called ferrymen before they returned to their topic of secondhand cars. As they did, my ears perked up. I was hearing something, but I couldn't put my finger on what. I looked around for Jerry, but he was still inside with the others. It was something else. Not a breeze rustling the leaves, not a single drop of rain. No smell coming from the dry old blue sunflowers resting by the mausoleum door. No, it was something much more mundane. A crow. The ferryman hadn't noticed it. It had landed on the edge of the gurney, thinking the plastic wrap held some kind of trash-like delicacy. These birds were hard-coded to tear through wrapping to find the goodies inside, and it didn't take long to act on those impulses. By the time the ferryman noticed, it was too late. The crow poked its beak straight through the plastic as black gas seeped out. It's hard to explain exactly what it looked like. It was a gas, but it moved like a liquid. But that's just the thing. It moved. Not just poured out, it moved with purpose. It swayed from side to side before dissolving into the ground. The ferryman freaked out as a confused crow took flight. Damn it. Gosh damn it, he got out. One of them sprinted for the church. The other hurried up to the gurney and brought out 3 sets of straps from underneath. He positioned them over the legs, chest, and head of the body in a trained routine. Seconds later, the body moved. It wasn't a conscious movement as much as a spasm, some dying mechanism triggering at full power, causing the whole body to flex. If he hadn't tightened the straps, more of the plastic would have ripped. There was still some black inside. Using duct tape, he secured the hole the crow had poked. Get inside, he screamed. Get inside now. It was full panic inside the church. The children who hadn't left yet were being held to the floor by their parents. The other ferryman was sprinting to his car to get the others. Pastor Oswald held a walkie-talkie in his left hand and a bone saw in his right. I walked up to him, watching his demeanor change from calm and collected to borderline frantic. What is the bone saw for? I asked. He looked up at me, but didn't answer. He kept his eyes trained on the children. What is the bone saw for? I repeated. He swallowed hard, regaining his composure. Safety measures. I get the OP has a report to do, but I don't know about you guys. We're running for the hills, right? Like at this point, mysterious black mist, and now the pastor's holding a bone saw. Later. Sorry, let's continue. Pastor Oswald got regular updates through his walkie-talkie. They were going house by house, checking all the children in town. What exactly they were checking for wasn't apparent. They were doing a sort of head count, listing off the family names of those cleared. The kids who were held down were being let up as suspicions faded. Things seemed to be okay for now. Check the wheat fields, Pastor Oswald demanded. Harlan liked the wheat fields. I noted it in my book and looked for Uncle Jerry. He was off in the corner, staying well out of everyone's way. I hurried up to him. I barely got the question out of my mouth before he answered it. It's not just a lung disease, he whispered. It's unnatural, defiant. I don't understand. Some things don't work as they're supposed to, he explained. When explanation fails to account for impossible things, sometimes we just have to make do with what works. Then explain it. Explain what you think happens. He looked at me, then back at the congregation. The tension was starting to subside. Old Harlan didn't want to go yet, he said, so he clawed his way back for one more go. He just needs to find someone willing to carry on for him. Like a possession? Jerry looked around the room and gave me the tiniest nod. As the congregation's tolerance to outsiders waned, Pastor Oswald hurriedly asked me to leave. He wasn't harsh about it, but rather matter-of-factly. This was a time of crisis in his community, and he couldn't take the time to be a good host. He insisted I come back in a couple of days when things calmed down, and he'd be happy to explain exactly what happened. But for now, I had to leave. I got in my car, waved goodbye to Uncle Jerry, and slowly made my way out of town. Not exactly the way I'd expected my day to go, but I wasn't about to intrude. Not on a night like this. I carefully bumped my way down the shitty road leading out of town and took a left. My car kept complaining about the Wi-Fi connection. I followed the road curling back and forth. There were no street lights, but the moon was as large as ever. That, and I wasn't really expecting to see a lot of people on these roads. That is, until I noticed something up ahead. There was a car in the middle of the road. The motor was still running. I could see the exhaust. The driver's side door was wide open and covered in blood. I stayed in my car, trying to get a signal on my phone. It didn't work. I shuffled my way out the door. I had to check if someone was injured. I mean, it sure looked like someone was injured, but there was no damage to the car. They hadn't hit anything. There was just a lot of open doors and blood, especially in the driver's seat. I called out to see if there was anyone there, but no one responded. The keys were still in the ignition. There was a comic book in the back seat. It was torn in half. I turned back towards my car and stopped. There was someone standing next to it, looking in through the window. The silhouette was barely covered by the moonlight, showing a figure with one arm much bigger than the other. A tilted torso shaped like a lowercase b. I could see the gleam of white in their eyes, but there was too much of it. Too many. It turned to me, still holding something in its left hand. It left a bloody handprint on my car. It tried to speak, but all that came out was a painful, drawn-out wailing. It was fast, much faster than me for sure. The moment it started running, I was only about 6 steps ahead. I threw myself into the parked car and slammed the driver's side door shut. I crawled over to the passenger side as the door was torn straight off and thrown down the road. I crawled out the other side and shut the passenger door behind me, trapping whatever was coming for me in the car, at least for a couple of seconds. It didn't take long for it to break through. I couldn't just run down the road in a straight line, it would catch me. I had to try and lose it. There was a wheat field on the left side of the road, and I figured I could lose it in there. I ran straight into it, keeping my head down and slowing only to hide my sound. I could hear something following me, something frustrated with a deep, wheezing breath, like a man slowly choking to death. I managed to find a spot in the middle of the field where I could duck down. It was right by the edge, in the shade of a tree. There was no way that thing would accidentally find me here. I listened to it shuffling about. It was nowhere near me, but I could tell there was something wrong with it. Its proportions were wrong. The sounds were wrong. It tried to speak, but it turned into either screams or a strangely coherent stutter. It sounded like words, but I couldn't make them out. Then I looked up. A family of crows tilted their heads down at me. One of them hopped along a branch, inspected me, and cawed. The others followed suit. I don't think they meant anything bad, but they drew attention to me. Soon, that thing was coming my way. I tried to get away, but even at a sprint, I was nowhere near as fast. I remember something knocking me to the ground and putting a foot on my back. At least, I think it was a foot. It was big enough to be a car tire. Something wrapped around my ankle and twisted. Twisted, pulled, and twisted again. I'm not going to try and explain the pain of several compound fractures to someone who has never broken a bone, but it's a terrifying violation. Your body is being willfully and forcefully disfigured in a way it never has. That thing was tearing off my leg at the knee. And it did. I've experienced pain and fear before, but the mortality of imminent death is something that's hard to explain. It's a category of its own. There's a searing pain in your nerves, an intense scalding heat, and as that heat grows ever worse, the rest of your body grows cold. You start to focus on such pinprick, minute details. The exact shape of a leaf on the ground, the texture of a grain of sand. Your mouth turns dry as you realize you can't force your eyes into focus. I was lying there on my stomach, my head to the side, bleeding out. The big thing lumbered away as someone joined me at my side. A man sat down in the grass, leaning against a tree. The crows didn't seem to react to him like they did with me. It was Uncle Jerry. "They don't mean to do it," he said. "They're not even scared. It's just like clawing your way to the surface for air. It's what comes naturally." I couldn't answer. I was trying to conserve my breath. "This happened to you too," he continued, "back when I went." Oh my gosh. Sorry guys, that's crazy. The chills I just got. So the funeral that he got Good Friday long was Uncle Jerry's funeral. But wait, hold on, we gotta read more. My eyes rolled, looking for him. I saw his shape, but it was diffuse, transparent. They got most of me out before I caught hold, cut the extra arms off and all, but part of me is still in there, just a bit distant. I could hear something shuffling around in the field. Whatever did this to me was still out there. "I'm not here to gloat," Jerry explained. "I've had time to calm down, to come to terms with things. Your life is yours. I accept that. Honestly, I'm just glad we had a chance to talk." He leaned in close, stroking my hair. I remember back when I was small, crying in my mother's arms. He was the man on the table, all those years. "If you let me in, I'll make this work. Just this once. What do you say?" I couldn't say anything, but I didn't have to. He knew my answer. I would do anything for a couple more breaths. I felt my pulse slow. I could focus, not just on a single straw of grass, but the whole field. I could wet my tongue and wipe the sweat from my brow. I scooched a little, expecting a fountain of pain for my missing leg, but nothing came of it. Looking down, I was fine. I had a new leg. The skin and hair of it looked a little darker, but it was a leg. It just wasn't mine. It took some time to get used to. By the time I got up off the ground, the thing was still running through the fields, tearing up swaths of wheat and wailing at the top of its lungs. It would stop at times to cough and wheeze, looking up at the moon. It seemed fascinated by it, like it really enjoyed the outdoors while simultaneously letting out a terrified scream. 2 wills, 1 body. I made my way back to the main road. There were more cars there. The ferrymen, along with a couple of volunteers. They were armed. The headlights from their cars cast these long shadows stretching down the road, highlighting the blood, some of which was mine, dripping from the torn edge of my pant leg. "It's in the fields," I said, pointing. "It's big." "Just the one?" "Just one." They fanned out and readied their weapons. The last thing I heard before they entered the wheat field was a silent, "Sorry, Harland." Seconds later, they were shooting. I sat down in my car, adjusting the seat to the new length of my leg. I heard the shooting, then the shooting stopped. They burned something in the field and dragged the abandoned car off the road. A couple days later, I talked to my aunt. She confirmed that I had had an Uncle Jerry and that I went to his funeral as a kid. That was the time I caught Good Friday long. Apparently, I was one of the first kids to survive it. She didn't want to get into specifics, but it had been violent. You have to do something terrible to stop it from expanding in a host. Researching it further, the best explanation of the condition is that a newly dead body sort of finds its way into a younger one, like a person desperate for air, except 2 people can't inhabit the same space. It collides, creating something twisted and in between. It can be stopped if noticed immediately, but even then, chances are slim. I wrote a paper about it, but it was rejected. I had to go to one of my backup subjects. This was a couple of years ago, and I've tried to gain some legitimacy. I've had my leg tested, but they haven't found a reason why it looks so different, or is of different length. Yes, at glance, it looks like something just slap grafted onto my knee, but that explanation has been denied several times. There's no scar tissue, no mending marks on the bone, nothing. It's like it was supposed to be there. And of course, I wonder if this is going to happen to me someday. I was born there, but I haven't lived there. How can you know whether you're part of this chain or not? You won't know for sure until you're gone, and by then, you're not experiencing anything. Or maybe in the case of Harland, you are. Do I want to? What's the alternative? I have plenty of years left to consider this, and I don't think I'll ever have a clear answer. Just to be sure, I think I'll have a final request upon my passing. Make sure my body is properly shrink-wrapped. This was an onion story, and I say that because it had so many layers that just kept getting peeled back, and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. The ritual sounds pretty ridiculous at first, but when you learn why they do it, it becomes one of the most terrifying parts of this story. The next story today is also from r/nosleep from user More Tanks. I think something on the subway is feeding on people like me. I first saw her on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was zoning out, half asleep on my usual subway commute. I always got on the same train, right at the front of the 3rd car. For some reason, there were usually fewer people there. Everything about my mornings was the same. Coffee, some quick breakfast, then off to work. And as an insurance claims adjuster, my job wasn't exactly exciting. But that morning, the moment I saw her, I knew something felt different. Her skin was pale, almost glowing silver beneath her long, jet-black hair. Her bright blue eyes were fixed on the darkness outside, staring into the empty tunnel as the train rushed forward. She was mesmerizing. There's no other word for it. As uncomfortable as it was, I couldn't look away, and somehow she noticed. Slowly, without moving her delicate face, she shifted her gaze, those piercing blue eyes landing directly on me. The moment our eyes met, I snapped my head away like a startled kid. Her eyes almost seemed to shine. Her pale face practically glowed, and I could swear there was the faintest hint of a smile at the corner of her lips. I turned my head in the opposite direction, trying way too obviously to look anywhere else, but she didn't stop looking at me. If anything, it felt like she turned even more toward me. I felt embarrassed, and strangely proud at the same time. A woman like her, looking at me that openly. Noticing me in a crowd like this, it was intoxicating. I almost forgot where I was, just basking in the warmth of that ocean blue gaze. When I glanced back at her, she smiled, but then shyly looked away, pretending she hadn't been staring at me at all. Her pale face was framed by red lipstick, her dark hair falling over her shoulders. I don't think I've ever studied someone the way I studied her. Who was she? Where was she going? The train began to slow, and I snapped out of it. This was my stop. But as I stood up, I saw her rise from her seat too, letting someone pass before stepping off the train. I felt a sudden rush of urgency. I needed to see her again, just once more. That narrow, perfect face, those deep, living blue eyes. I pushed my way through the doors and into the crowd, searching for that black hair. It felt like the world slowed down for a split second. She was already on the escalator, moving upward. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with her small, delicate hand, and just for a brief moment, just one, she looked back at me. I swear to God, out of all those rushing, gray, everyday people, she saw me again. Then she disappeared into the crowd above. I know this sounds stupid, but the rest of my day felt off after that. It was just a moment, barely anything, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. My mind kept drifting back to her. That radiant look in her eyes, her features, the way she vanished. I felt this strange kind of sadness, like I was already afraid I'd never see her again. But why did it matter? Why couldn't I let it go? The rest of the day dragged by like always. Papers, reports, claim forms, just routine. Then I went home. Part of me hoped I'd see her again on the way back, but she wasn't there. Everything felt duller on the way home. The same people, the same empty faces I saw every day. It was like something was missing from all of them. Something bright. Something blue. The rest of my evening went the same as always. Video games, TV, something to eat, then bed. It's a boring life, no question about that, but something was different. Something was there in the back of my mind, making me look forward to the next morning. And I didn't even understand why. I left late that morning. I was rushing, thinking I'd miss my usual train. I was practically running down the stairs to the platform. Or maybe I wasn't really rushing because of the train. I barely made it onto the platform when, through the crowd, I caught a glimpse of those familiar blue eyes. For a second, it felt relieving. But what was she doing down here? I'd never seen her at this station before. How was she here now? Had I just never noticed? The train pulled in, and she stepped inside with the flow of people. I froze for a second, just staring, then snapped out of it and pushed my way in after her. There were way more people than usual. I couldn't even get to my usual spot. But the moment I saw her, standing by the next set of doors, I suddenly realized what had been bothering me about the crowd. And weirdly, I felt better. Because just like me, she looked at me too. Our eyes met for a second. Her ocean blue gaze felt like it was searching for mine. The air around me felt warmer, and for a moment, I wasn't even on that crowded train anymore. It felt like we were somewhere else. Somewhere that belonged only to the two of us. It lasted maybe a second, but it stuck with me. That look, that faint smile, that soft, almost unreal face, it was enough for that entire morning. I don't even know why, but I smiled at her. She seemed to get a little shy, glancing away. Shit. What if she wasn't even smiling at me? The thought hit me instantly. Great, I'm making a fool of myself on the subway. What kind of world would this be where someone like her would be into me? Or even single at all? Side note, guys, the author portrayed the overthinking of men very well. I could feel sweat forming on my back, like this was somehow life or death important, whether some random girl on the train had a boyfriend or not. I looked away, feeling stupid. What was I even thinking? That I'd find love on a subway train? But as I stared blankly ahead, I caught something in the reflection of the dark window. She was looking at me, again. I turned back, and for a few seconds, we held eye contact. It was simple, but it felt incredible. This woman, she actually sees me. The train jerked to a stop. People grabbed onto whatever they could. Then the door slid open with a loud click. A wave of commuters poured out of the car. This wasn't my stop, so I stepped aside, letting everyone off. Once things settled down, I quickly moved into my usual spot, but she was gone. I craned my neck, shifting around in my seat, almost falling out of it trying to find her, but she wasn't there. The door slammed shut. I felt that sinking realization. She wasn't on the train anymore. But then I looked out onto the platform, and I saw that black hair. She was standing there, scanning the crowd like a startled deer. Looking for someone? Probably waiting for her boyfriend. Why else would she get off at a different stop than yesterday? Then she saw me. Her expression changed, something like sadness, maybe disappointment, maybe something else. For a second, it looked like she raised her hand. Or maybe I just imagined it. The train started moving and disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel. My mind was somewhere else again. I could barely remember what I did all day. I went through the usual routine, but it felt like I wasn't really there. Like part of me was still on that train, waiting for that beautiful black-haired woman to look at me again, to smile, to shyly glance away. The next thing I knew, I was already home. The whole day slipped away in daydreams, imagining possibilities that probably had no chance of ever happening, or hoping, wishing, that I'd get some kind of sign that she was actually interested in me. And then, just as quickly, I'd sink into this quiet dread, convincing myself it was all in my head, that tomorrow I'd probably see her with some other guy. I couldn't fall asleep. I tossed and turned, restless, wide awake, and when I finally drifted off, I almost immediately found myself somewhere strange, but familiar. I was on the train, the same gray, ordinary subway car I always rode, but it was empty, completely empty. I was all alone, or at least I thought I was, because when I looked beside me, she was there. Smaller than I remembered, pale, almost unnaturally so, and I knew instantly it was her. She turned to me, those large blue eyes locking onto mine. "Come," she whispered, leaning closer to me. "Come home with me." I could feel the warmth of her body, the soft, sweet scent of her perfume wrapping around me, the way her jet black hair brushed lightly against my skin. My body trembled, my heart pounded. It didn't feel like a dream. It felt real. She adjusted the shoulder of her dark red dress, then slowly rested her head against me. My alarm dragged me out of it. I shot up in bed, gasping for air. My whole body was drenched in sweat, and every part of me wanted to go back to that dream. But was it even a dream? My morning routine blurred together. My thoughts felt foggy, distant. There was no room in my mind for anything else, only her. I was pacing nervously on the subway platform. The crowd kept growing, more and more people piling in. But she was nowhere to be seen. After that dream the night before, I needed to see her. There was no way she just wouldn't be here. That would have completely broken me. Like some kind of lunatic, I kept snagging my head around, scanning the crowd, thinking maybe I just missed her. Maybe she was standing somewhere else. But she wasn't there. I let 2 trains go by, telling myself maybe she was just late. Maybe she took a different route today. But she didn't come. By then, I was already running late for work, and my mood had gone to shit. Even this tiny bit of happiness had been taken from me. The one small light in this miserable life. On the train, I just stared blankly ahead like a zombie. Nothing really mattered. I just wanted to see her. Just for a second. That black hair, those deep, hypnotic blue eyes. I needed to see her. When I got off, I drifted with the crowd, my face completely drained. I wasn't even looking at people anymore. Just legs, shoes, the same pants, the same suits. Everyone moving forward like it was the only thing that mattered in their lives. Then, suddenly, something hit me. A scent. Something I'd never smelled before. Soft, sweet, almost addictive. A perfume that seemed to crawl into your head and start pulling at your thoughts. But the crowd kept pushing me forward. There was no time to stop. No way to figure out where it was coming from. Everyone was rushing, trapped in the same endless loop. I lifted my head, hope flooding back into me, searching for the source of that scent. The scent I'd only ever dreamed about. And then I saw her, like a painting. I was already near the escalator when some overweight, sweaty guy tried to shove past me, telling me to hurry up. But that moment, that single moment, is burned into my mind forever. She was standing there. The crowd moved around her, flowing past like there was some invisible barrier keeping them away. No one bumped into her. No one pushed her aside. But who would dare? She looked excited, like she'd been waiting there for a long time, like she was searching for someone she met every morning. Was she waiting for me? Maybe she took an earlier train and I was the idiot thinking she was late. She wore a light brown coat, perfectly outlining her slim figure. Her blue eyes practically glowed among all the dull, gray people around her. Then she saw me. Her gaze locked onto mine as I moved up the escalator. I could see it, the relief in her eyes, the tension in her face melting away. She'd been waiting for me. When I reached the top, there was no question in my mind. I had to wait for her. No matter what, I had to talk to her. I needed to hear her voice. I needed more. I needed to know who she was. So I waited and waited. Long minutes passed, but she never came up. I started biting my nails, pacing, stepping a little farther from the entrance, but still watching every person coming up. But she wasn't there. The sound of my phone ringing snapped me out of it. "Zach, where the hell are you?" My boss's voice cut in, irritated. "You were supposed to be here 30 minutes ago. We have a meeting this morning." Oh, I didn't even know what to say. Honestly, I didn't care. I was still half watching the subway entrance. "I'm on my way, Derek. Just ran into something this morning. I'm coming. I'll be there." I stayed a few seconds longer, waiting for my blue-eyed muse to appear. But no one came. Just the same dull, forgettable people. Finally, I turned away, completely disconnected from reality, and headed to work. I was almost an hour late, but no one would understand. For the first time, I had something to hold on to. I just sat there, staring at my monitor. I barely got any actual work done all day. My mind was stuck on one thing, the woman from the subway. I could see her in front of me, those red lips, those deep, ocean blue eyes, her long, straight black hair. When lunch break came, I told myself I'd go grab something to eat. I ended up at the subway instead. I just stood there waiting, hoping she'd show up. Maybe she'd pass through. Maybe she'd be heading somewhere nearby. Maybe, by some random chance, she'd be there. But she wasn't. I spent almost an hour down there, and honestly, I don't even know what I was expecting. I didn't get food, I just stood on the platform and waited. I went back to work with my stomach growling, but I didn't care. What bothered me more was that I could only ever see her in that one short moment in the morning. Just a glimpse. That's all I ever got. By the time I finally finished work, I was completely drained. Tense, on edge, craving just one more look at her. I stayed near the subway station until it got dark, sitting on a nearby bench, watching, hoping I'd catch her on her way home. That I'd finally get to talk to her, but she never showed up. Doesn't she go this way? Did she leave earlier? Why wasn't she here? Was she with someone else? By the time I got home, my head was pounding with questions. I just wanted to see her again. At that point, I would have settled for just standing near her on the train. The moment I walked into my apartment, I collapsed on the couch. I was exhausted, but I couldn't rest. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't sleep. I didn't want to eat. All I could think about was her, that woman, that beauty on the subway. By the morning, I was dizzy. The world felt blurred around me. My steps were heavy, unsteady, but somehow I pulled myself together and headed out again. Not because of work, because it was morning, and I could see her again. I could see her. There were way fewer people than usual for that time of day, but I pushed forward anyway, half stumbling down toward the familiar subway entrance. I was barely holding myself together, squinting, searching for that one thing that still mattered. But she wasn't there. Again, and the train didn't come. Minutes passed. Nothing. I glanced up at the display. 8 minutes until the next train. Why? It usually runs every 2 or 3 minutes. What the hell is going on today? I pulled my phone out of my pocket. The battery was almost dead. Saturday. I didn't even have work today. When did it become Saturday? How many days have I been searching for this woman? I don't even know what I was doing anymore. I wandered around the neighborhood, sometimes going home, sometimes just hanging around the subway station. There were times I stood out there for hours, just waiting. My entire weekend was spent focused on one thing, seeing her again. Maybe she'd be around the corner. Maybe I'd run into her on the subway stairs, but she was nowhere. I searched for her obsessively, like I was losing my mind. People started avoiding me, giving me weird looks. They probably thought I was some kind of crazy homeless guy living on the streets. I don't even know how many days I went without properly eating or drinking. Sometimes, when it crossed my mind or when the hunger got too strong, I'd go home. But even that felt unbearable, because all I could do was think about this. While I'm here, she might be out there, going to the subway, going to the store, just walking somewhere. So every time I got home, I'd almost immediately rush back out into the street. I had no idea what day it was anymore. No idea how long I'd been drifting around, searching for that black-haired woman. Then it was morning again. The crowd moved through the streets like it always did. My clothes were filthy, wet, stained, covered in grime. It looked like I'd been like this for far longer than just a weekend. Some broken part of my mind just decided, like this was normal, that I should go to work. So I grabbed my half-empty briefcase and joined the crowd. I stood there with them, waiting for the train. People moved away from me. Some gave me looks, rolled their eyes, but to me it felt just like another normal morning. Until the train arrived. She was on it. Like a beam of light cutting through my dull gray world, her black hair seemed to glow inside the subway car, standing out among all the lifeless faces. Her red lips shimmered, her blue eyes danced, and the moment she saw me, they locked onto me. It felt like I didn't even need to think anymore, like my body was moving on its own, guided by something else. I don't remember who I pushed past, who I shoved out of the way, but suddenly, I was standing right in front of her. The crowded subway car pressed us together, bodies packed tight. I could smell her, that same sweet, almost intoxicating perfume. She didn't look at me directly, acting like she was focused somewhere else. My brain wasn't working. Not a single decent line came to mind. Hey, I leaned closer awkwardly. I mean, we ride the same train a lot. I've seen you around. You work somewhere near here or something? She didn't respond right away. Didn't make a face, didn't turn away. It was like she was just watching me with those beautiful eyes. I mean, I tried to recover. I've seen you around here before. Where do you work? I don't work around here, she said suddenly. Her voice was soft, light, almost musical. I couldn't have imagined anything more perfect. Oh, right, I said, caught off guard. Then why do you come this way in the mornings? I have business here, she replied, smiling faintly as she looked away. It felt like a dream, a perfect living dream. Yeah, I smiled too. Guess I do too, if you think about it. We both laughed quietly. I'm getting off here, she said as the train began to slow. Me too, I answered instantly, without thinking. I was heading this way anyway. She smiled to herself, then brushed her hair behind her ear. Her neck, pale, smooth, almost seemed to glow. She was perfect. When the train came to a full stop, the crowd shifted, and we moved with it. As we stepped off, she stumbled slightly in her heels. I caught her. You okay? I asked, trying to sound calm. Yeah, she said. These stupid shoes, but thank you for catching me. I smiled at her, my chest practically bursting. Walking there with her, arm in arm, I could feel people staring. The jealousy, the judgment, men checking her out, women looking at her with envy. We moved through the station together, like some kind of royal couple, and I don't think I've ever been happier in my life. "Where are you heading next?" she asked as we reached the top of the escalator. That's when it hit me. I wasn't even at my usual stop. I had no idea where I was. But it didn't matter. I'd already won. "I guess wherever you're going," I said with a smile, trying to sound casual. "I've got time. I can walk you for a bit." "Oh, what a gentleman," she laughed softly, running her gloved hand along my arm. "Come on, then." We walked a few blocks. The morning crowd thinned out, the streets growing quieter. I walked beside her, proud, completely lost in that warm haze. I didn't even notice when we turned into an alley. Between trash bags and rotting piles of garbage, she suddenly stopped, slipping her arm out of mine. I turned back, confused. She just stood there. Her face had gone serious, and her blue eyes, they seemed brighter now. Not warm, something else, something sick. They moved like waves, like ocean pulling you under. "My dear," she said, but her lips didn't move. "Give yourself to me." I heard the words clear as day, but she hadn't spoken them. Or maybe she had, just not with her mouth. It was inside my head. Soft, melodic, pulling me in. What do you want?" I asked, my voice shaking. She didn't answer. She stepped closer, right in front of me. Her hand pressed against my chest, too light, too cold. Those shifting eyes studied my face. Then the smell hit me. That sweet, intoxicating scent, but here, surrounded by garbage. It felt wrong, rotting, worse than the stench around us. And then I was on the ground. Just like that. The world spun, but somehow it felt like I was spinning the other way. The woman I had thought was so beautiful stood over me. She pulled off her glove. Her fingers were long, black as her hair, as her eyes. I couldn't move. I lay there on a wet trash bag, everything feeling like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The haze was gone, completely gone. She still looked young, beautiful, but there was something else now. Something not human. Her pale skin shimmered faintly. Her blue eyes flickered, unnatural, and I knew. This thing had been playing with me. She raised one of those long black fingers, then slowly grabbed my face, squeezing my mouth open. With her other hand, she forced a finger down my throat. A sharp, tearing pain ripped through me. I felt it, felt that black, claw-like nail scraping down my throat, tearing into something I didn't even know I had. And then something worse, much worse. It felt like something inside me was being pulled out. From somewhere deep, somewhere no one should ever reach. It lasted maybe a second, and she yanked her finger back out. Tears streamed down my face. My lips trembled as her finger slid free with a sickening sound. And then I saw it, a small, glowing blue droplet slipping out of my mouth. Before it could fall, she caught it. She looked at it for a moment, then swallowed it. "I'm sorry," she said, almost playfully, "but this is what keeps me alive, my dear knight." My body still wouldn't move. My muscles locked, frozen. Tears kept falling, but inside, there was nothing, just emptiness. She calmly put her glove back on, adjusted her clothes. And when she was done, she leaned down and pressed a slow kiss against my lips. Then she stood up and just walked away, like she had never been there, leaving me behind. Empty, alone. Everything was blurry. I don't know when my body finally came back to me, or where that thing, disguised as a woman, had gone. I didn't even know who I was anymore. I didn't feel any longing for her. I didn't feel the need to go back to the subway. I was just empty, like a hollow shell stumbling forward. My body felt exhausted, like I hadn't slept in weeks. I hadn't even noticed before, but I wasn't wearing any shoes. I'd lost weight, way more than I should have. My hair was matted, sticking out in every direction. But the worst part wasn't how I looked. It was how I felt, or didn't feel. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was like I had lost the ability to feel anything at all. Like that part of me, the part that reacts to the world, that feels something, has been taken. I somehow made it back home. My apartment was a mess. It looked like I hadn't done anything but come home and trash the place for weeks. I collapsed into bed and passed out instantly. When I woke up, I cleaned everything. Myself, the apartment. As it turned out, I'd been fired 3 weeks ago. I got another job, slowly pulled my life back together. But the one thing I couldn't fix was what was inside me. I was like a machine. No purpose. Nothing entertained me. Nothing made me angry. I couldn't feel joy, not even the simplest kind. Days would pass like that. It felt like a mental breakdown, except for one small detail, something I couldn't explain. One day, I was heading home from work. As I got down to the subway, the train I was about to catch was already closing its doors. And there she was, standing inside. That same woman, long black hair, ocean blue eyes. She didn't recognize me, or maybe she just didn't care. She was watching someone else, a heavyset guy. The way he looked at her, that same desperate hunger. The air around me felt like it froze, but I didn't feel anything. Not a single thing. Not even now. The way the main character in this deteriorated throughout the story was so sad. He sees the most beautiful woman that he's ever seen on the subway, and she was slowly manipulating him into becoming her next victim. Like, bro, she doesn't like you. She is quite literally trying to eat your soul. The next one's from r/NoSleep from user Magpie Writing. I work in a haunted antique shop. I hate fulfilling special orders. I don't know that I believe in ghosts. When I offhandedly mention that Ruby's Antiques is haunted, most people conjure up ideas of ghouls and spirits and spectral echoes floating and fluttering through the narrow, crowded aisles. They think I'm talking about long-dead souls attached to objects they once owned, lingering in confusion or malevolence. But Ruby's Antiques isn't haunted by ghosts. At least, I wouldn't call the things that make a home here ghosts. Ruby's Antiques is haunted the way survivors of some horrific accident are haunted. Tragedy and terror soak the brocade, wallpaper, and scuffed, varnished, sticky flooring, and settle over everything like a heavy layer of dust and cobwebs. Strange things have happened here as long as I've worked here, but never anything quite so awful as a few weeks ago. That particular day started as they always do. Being the only employee, I opened the shop with a brass key and a flip of the hand-painted placard hanging in the only window. The owner, an older woman I've met in person only once, Miss Rutledge, lets me set the hours I work, so the store opens any time from sunrise to sunset, on most days of the week. The fact that the shop opens and closes according to my schedule should have given me pause when I met Miss Rutledge for the hiring interview, but desperate times, etc., etc. Immediately after opening the shop, before taking up the register, I migrated to our music section. We have a seemingly infinite record collection. Yes, I've tried counting it, and I gave up after 3 days in a row of barely making a dent, and a pristine gramophone that softly creaks out its music over the entire shop. I chose one of my favorite records, from a collection that looks at least somewhat recognizable. I've found it's best practice not to stray too far from normal. Some of these songs can't be found anywhere else, and my musical selection's a big hit amongst my regulars. With a slight crackle, a honeyed voice underpinned by smooth brass instruments echoed out of the gramophone. Satisfied, I tucked a misbehaving tuft of hair behind my ear and took a seat behind the register, humming quietly along to a song I'd never heard before. Familiar leather creaked under my weight, and the golden lamp on my desk flicked to life with a hum and a buzz, and my day officially began. The morning passed quietly. My first customers were a mother and her young son, faces I'd never seen before. They ventured into the dreaded doll section and returned half an hour later with a pudgy porcelain doll that had too many teeth painted in its open, smiling mouth. The little boy looked absolutely delighted by his find, his mother significantly less so. I pasted on my best customer service smile and processed the purchase swiftly and efficiently, so I could get that horrible doll away from me. I'd never seen it before. That's not uncommon in the doll section. They're always changing. Nobody showed up for a few hours after that. Closer to noon, one of my regulars hurried in. Baseball cap slung low over his bloodshot eyes. Flannel shirt smeared with grease and dust where it clung to his broad shoulders. "Good morning, Mr. Callahan," I said, tracking his movement towards the back of the store. Mr. Callahan lifted his chin and stared at me. Even beneath the shadow of his cap, his eyes were dark and heavy and piercing, dull pinpricks on my skin. "How many times do I gotta tell you, kid? Just call me Cal." "As far as I can tell, everyone calls Mr. Callahan Cal. Everyone except me." I shrugged. "Store policy," I told him truthfully, the way I always did when he complained about my formality. "If you'd like to register a complaint, I can put you in contact with Miss Rutledge." No thanks. I don't need to get her involved." He hustled away very quickly after that. Shame. I like talking to Mr. Callahan. Maybe a little more than I should, but that's neither here nor there. I ate lunch behind the register, a messy ham and cheese sandwich I'd slapped together that morning, groggy and half hung over from a boring night out, and sold a lovely set of earrings and a rickety chair to a couple unfamiliar customers. I was considering slipping out into the aisles to see what Mr. Callahan was up to when my phone buzzed on the desk. I flipped it over. Miss Rutledge's name glared up at me from the screen, along with a photo of twisting rose bushes I'd never set as our contact photo. "Miss Rutledge, how may I help you?" "Oliver, sweetheart," Miss Rutledge rasped, her pack-an-hour voice like stones grinding together. "A friend of mine is coming in to pick up a special order. You'll be there for him, won't you?" Dread crept into my chest, cold and heavy. "Of course, Miss Rutledge." She hacked an angry, tortured laugh that crackled through the phone. "That a boy. Should be labeled with her name. Got it?" Dial tone rang in my ear before I could ask whose name I was looking for. Tension shivered up my arms. All special orders were stored somewhere in the temperamental recesses of the basement, and I hated going down there. It was cold and damp one day, dry and dusty the next. The only consistency you could count on was the poorly spaced flickering lights and a faint, sour scent wafting up from deeper within. With a heavy sigh, I propped up the small sign signaling I was in the back and slipped into the shop's narrow aisles. I wasn't worried about people leaving without paying. If they wanted to steal from us, the consequences were on their heads, not mine. I trailed the outskirts of the shop first. Most days, the door to the basement could be found near the back of the shop, though that wasn't a guarantee. I climbed over and under a maze of interlocking furniture threatening to spill out of its designated section like an overgrown fungus, and made a mental note to reorganize our living and dining sets. I avoided the dreaded doll section like the plague it was. Mr. Callahan was near the back corner of the store, glancing between an array of shelves and what looked like an old, faded blueprint covered in nonsense. Escaresque lines. Sorry guys, I'm not even going to act like I know how to say this word. I gotta Google it. Escheresque lines. I almost stumbled into his back when my foot caught on a plastic plant spilling out of its pot. Only quick reflexes and a sharp and extremely unprofessional bark of "shit" kept me from embarrassing myself. Mr. Callahan startled back, then hedged forward to steady me with a warm, broad hand on my shoulder. For a moment, my growing chill was chased away. "Mr. Callahan," I smiled to hide my wince, my voice creaking in my throat. "Sorry about that." He sighed. Conspicuously, he rolled up his blueprints and half tucked them behind his back. "Not a problem, kid." I hadn't intended on coming across him, but Mr. Callahan knew these dark recesses of the shop almost better than I did myself. He's our most regular customer, though. I can't remember the last time I sold him anything. I maintained my customer service smile. "Have you come across the basement today by any chance?" For a moment, he was quiet. His eyes narrowed. He inspected me like I was a zoo animal performing some particularly odd behavior, and the back of my neck burned. "Right there," he said, thumb jerking behind him. And so it was. Somehow I hadn't noticed it until he pointed it out. The basement doorway hung open as it always did, a delicate brass chain draped across at waist height holding up the hand-painted "Employees Only" sign. A naked light bulb illuminated the narrow steps and old wooden paneling of the walls. Sickly yellow light spilled out at the bottom of the stairs, glistening off freshly waxed tiles that filled my throat with unease. Our basement wasn't usually so pristine. I approached the staircase, forcing myself to take slow, soothing breaths. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan." Carefully, I stepped over the chain and began to descend. I distantly heard Mr. Callahan grumbling and the rustle of him unfurling his blueprints once more. But my head swam with the sound of buzzing incandescent lights and the throbbing silence pulsing up from the basement. The soles of my shoes clicked softly on the tiled steps. Already, the hot, sour tendrils of an unidentifiable scent drifted up and tickled my nose. I covered my mouth and nose with the sleeve of my sweater as I stepped out of the stairwell. A long, narrow hallway stretched out before me. Flickering yellow light warped my sight just slightly. The floor appeared to slope upwards, the ceiling dipping down, like the hallway was narrowing and tightening, threatening to swallow me whole before I reached the door at the end. I lifted my chin and strode up the hallway with purpose. It's best not to show hesitation. At the end of the hall, I unlocked the door with the same brass key I'd used to open the shop. The door swung open to a dimly lit storage room. Boxes sat stacked in haphazard piles. Cardboard boxes, wooden chests, metal tackle boxes, any kind of container with a semblance of hinge or lid, and a bare light bulb hung from a chain, swaying softly in the draft from the newly opened door. Odd geometric shadows stretched and swayed along the floor. I swallowed and tried not to stare too deeply into those shadows. Skittering sounds echoed in the heavy quiet. Rats, I could only hope. The noises crept closer before ebbing away. Nearer, farther, nearer, farther. I ignored the shiver crawling up my scalp and carefully approached the nearest stack of boxes. Each box in special storage was labeled in Miss Rutledge's loopy scrawl. Most were seemingly random numbers, some in Cyrillic or kanji scripts, and a handful were decorated with symbols I couldn't read or understand. Eventually, I found a box labeled Celeste. It seemed right. The box was a small silver jewelry box, carved with intricate swirling designs and latched with a tiny padlock. The metal leached warmth from my skin when I picked it up and clutched it carefully against my chest. My knuckles ached from the cold in seconds. I turned and my heart sank to my gut. The door had disappeared. I was sure I'd only ventured 10 feet or so into the special storage. I was certain. But behind me stretched a long, cluttered room, filled to bursting with various boxes and lit intermittently by dangling white light bulbs. My heart skipped. Sweat from my clammy palms smeared the delicate surface of the jewelry box. I closed my eyes. I inhaled until my chest ached and my throat burned with that sour smell. Then exhaled until my head felt light and dizzy. When I opened my eyes, the door hadn't returned. In fact, the room had gotten narrower. "Damn," I whispered, then bit the inside of my cheek. Miss Rutledge frowned on unprofessional language when I was on shift, no matter my surroundings. I tucked the silver jewelry box beneath one arm. Cold radiated from within, soaking through my sweater and the button-down I wore beneath, spreading through my ribs and leaving me shivering. With my free hand, I patted my back pocket for my phone. Nothing. I twisted and checked the other pocket. I felt around my front pockets, then patted both back pockets again, just in case. I could see it clearly. My phone, discarded at the register after Miss Rutledge's cold call, pleasantly displaying the time and the background photo of the stray cat that lived around my apartment. Futile dread filled my chest, as cold as the jewelry box. I'd been trapped in the basement before, but never without my phone. I couldn't phone Miss Rutledge for instructions this time. Blinking shadows and dust from my eyes, I quickly glanced around the storage room. It was familiar and strange all at once, like someone had taken the special storage room I knew and just stretched it out into a long, narrow corridor, populated with the same stacks of strange boxes and the same dangling light bulb. "There's always a way out," I said softly, repeating words Miss Rutledge had said to me in these predicaments before. "You only have to find it." Then I picked a direction and began walking. Writing this now, I don't know how long I spent walking the length of the special storage room. It seemed to stretch endlessly. No matter how far I walked, how many piles of boxes I passed, the far wall never seemed to draw closer. I kept Celeste's jewelry box clutched to my chest. The chill helped cool the terrifying heat building under my skin. The skittering came back, and it sounded louder, larger, closer. When a door finally appeared, tucked behind a stack of cardboard boxes taller than me, I could have wept. When I swung that door open and came face to face with the familiar aisles of Ruby's Antiques, I'm not going to admit that my eyes burned with a few unshed tears, but I won't deny it either. Bright yellow sunlight blared through the shop's only window, distant and yet so soothing my legs nearly collapsed beneath me. Pleasantly cool air wicked away the sweat beating at the nape of my neck. I let out a long, heavy sigh, my tension and anxiety slipping away with every breath. Mr. Callahan was still in one of the obscure corners of the shop. I waved, but he didn't react, probably too absorbed in his work. Another customer stood in our jewelry aisle. Her back was hunched and her head down, so I didn't interrupt her search. The register greeted me with open arms. I collapsed into the soft leather of my chair, tipping my head back into the stripe of harsh sunlight pouring through the lone window. I placed Celeste's jewelry box atop the otherwise empty desk, wiping away a few foggy smears left by my clammy hands. Sweeping with the sleeve of my sweater until the silvery surface gleamed, and settled in to wait for Miss Rutledge's friend to arrive and collect her special order. I decided I would close the shop as soon as she picked it up. My soft bed called my name in a siren song. Eyes half lidded, I basked in the silence and sunlight, the ache of tension slowly loosening within my stomach. I waited. Neither Mr. Callahan nor my other customer appeared at the register. I waited longer. The shop remained quiet and empty, the little bell over the door never ringing out to announce Celeste's arrival. I waited, and the chill crept into my knuckles and the tips of my fingers. Cold and poor circulation leached all warmth and color from my hands, leaving them stained a pale yellow from bloodlessness. I rubbed my hands together and cupped them in the sunlight pouring through the window, as though I could gather its warmth in the cradle of my palms. Warmth never came. If anything, my hands burned colder, joints stiffening up and the skin under my nails fading to a faint blue. Frowning, I brought my hands to my face. I puffed hot breaths onto the frigid skin in an attempt to warm them, and my breath clouded out in white wisps of steam. I paused, heartbeat skittering slightly as my teeth ached in the chill. It couldn't be below freezing inside the shop. We were in the middle of an unseasonably warm spring. The world outside a harsh landscape of blue sky and green grass and sun-baked cobblestone. And besides, our AC was not nearly that powerful. I hadn't spent 3 summers broiling alive just for Ruby's Antiques to become a winter wonderland in the middle of April. A shiver climbed my spine, rattling my teeth until I clenched my jaw tight and tucked my hands inside my sweater sleeves. The cold was growing bitter, almost damp, tinged with a sour scent of mildew, like it was wafting up from the basement. Maybe I hadn't closed the door when I'd come up. Fear surged in my throat. Upstairs. I didn't remember climbing any stairs. I couldn't remember how I'd gotten out of special storage. There was just a door, and then there was the shop. "What the hell?" I whispered, then flinched. That was my 3rd infraction. Any moment, Miss Rutledge would be texting my phone to remind me of the shop's politeness policy. Except my phone was nowhere in sight. It wasn't in any of my pockets. I'd left it at the register, face up, displaying the grubby grin of Puddles the street cat. It was sitting helplessly, gormlessly in the shop, while I was somewhere that was decidedly not Ruby's Antiques. This was still the unpredictable basement, and that light shining in from the outside, the familiar face of Mr. Callahan and my other customer. My mouth tasted like ash. All at once, I realized just how impossibly quiet the shop was. No music croaked out from an ancient gramophone. No metal and jewels clinked as the unknown customer rifled through trays and bins and boxes of jewelry. Silence hung heavy in the air. I felt eerily alone, and yet the hairs rising on the back of my neck reminded me that there were two other bodies inside this facsimile of the shop. Slowly, I turned my head in the direction I'd last seen Mr. Callahan. I couldn't see him anymore. My other customer had gone uncomfortably still where she'd been over the necklace display. I could only glimpse the back of her head and the gnarled curl of her hands around the wooden shelves and rice paper screens sectioning off the aisles of the shop. But something about the way she stood, it just wasn't right. She was more like a posed mannequin than a person. In the harsh light streaming in from the shop's sole window, her skin seemed plasticky and slightly discolored. I moved silently, carefully, as I leaned in my seat for a better look. Long black hair streamed down from her unmoving back, gleaming with iridescent undertones like an oil slick. Leather creaked under my weight as I tipped another few inches forward. It echoed through the silence like a gunshot. My heartbeat skittered and skipped. Cold sweat pooled at the base of my spine and in the crooks of my knees and elbows. I held my breath and swore I could hear my own pulse, a warm pounding in the quiet. The customer with the long, oily hair began to move. It began as a twitch, a shudder, a small jitter of motion, accompanied by little plasticky pops and clicks, soft yet deafening. I sat perfectly still as her head tilted up, inch by agonizing inch. Fear spread through me like ice. I didn't know what would happen if she looked at me, if she noticed me, paid attention to me, but my nerves screamed at the idea. I didn't know where I was, but I knew I wasn't supposed to be there. Please move, I begged myself in my head, frantic thoughts buzzing and biting like a swarm of flies, my fingers clenched uselessly around the armrests of the chair. The woman's face finally turned to meet mine. I felt sick. Sick. My vision narrowed to a relentless stare, and my throat closed around a choked-off gasp. I don't think I'd been expecting her to look like a monster, or to have some ghoulish visage straight out of a horror movie. Like I said, Ruby's Antiques isn't haunted by ghosts, but I wasn't expecting her to look so imperfectly perfect. Her skin was pale and shiny and flawless. It gleamed in the harsh white light pouring in through the window, from the facsimile of the world outside that set my teeth on edge. Her eyes were big and dark, her body narrow and elegant despite its twitchy movements. She was too sharp to look at, like an overprocessed image. I fumbled for Celeste's jewelry box with clumsy hands, shoving up from my chair with enough force to send it scraping back into the wall behind me with a clatter of wood. The woman tipped her head to one side. Dark hair slipped over one shoulder, slow and liquid in its movements. She had all the features I'd expect on a human face. Those big eyes, a narrow nose, a wide-set mouth with pale lips, but it didn't seem right. Every tiny jitter or twitch, for just a second, her features looked painted on. She started creeping closer. Her limbs moved slow and spidery. Soft click-click-click noises creaked out with every movement. I did not want her close to me. With the silver jewelry box hugged against my chest, the way a child clutches a teddy bear to keep them safe from monsters in the dark, I slipped away from the register and into the cramped aisles of not Ruby's Antiques. The door I'd come through was near the back left corner of the shop, nestled between clothing racks and esoteric board games. If I retraced my steps, I would find my way back. Relief bloomed in my chest when the door came into view. That relief crumbled into panic when I opened the door to a narrow, dark staircase, descending even deeper. No, I said through clenched teeth. No. I closed the door and opened it again. The staircase was narrower and darker, and the air drifting up from below carried the chilling bite of frost. Click, click, click. Fear shot into my throat. I looked over my shoulder to see a slick of oil-black hair spilling into the aisle. In creaky, slippery movements, the woman's face followed, peeking out from behind a wooden cabinet piled high with chessboards. Her pale, spidery fingers curled around the corners of the cabinet. I'm secure enough in my lack of masculinity to admit the noise I let out was a fairly undignified squeak. I stumbled back, heel nearly catching on the edge of the uppermost step. Gravity swooped in my gut before I righted myself. A long moment passed. Another, stretching out like strands of syrup. The woman crept fully around the corner. I spun on my heel and launched myself down the stairs, 2 steps at a time. My footsteps echoed in the tiny tunnel of the stairwell. The only light came from a naked white light bulb, buzzing and flickering with each step, like any vibration might knock the wires completely loose. The staircase was abnormally long and ended in a plain wooden door, painted in rough strokes of white paint. I didn't have high expectations when I wrenched open that door, but my stomach still flipped with delirious nausea. Because not only was I staring into Ruby's antiques, but the woman was there, a foot or so closer than I'd last seen her. I whirled around and found a descending staircase behind me. Shiny tile floors gleamed under harsh fluorescent light. The air was so cold I couldn't feel my hand where it clutched Celeste's jewelry box to my chest. Panic had taken hold of me pretty thoroughly at that point. I barely wasted a second before bolting down those stairs. I could still hear the soft click, click, click of her moving even as I stumbled off the last step and threw open the cold plastic door at the bottom of the stairs. There she was again, even closer, staggering forward with jerky start-stop footsteps. Around her stood Ruby's antiques, coated in a glimmering layer of plasticky vinyl. Terror and frustration rose in my throat, wet and hot like a sob. I slammed the door shut and skittered down yet another set of stairs behind me. I nearly dropped the jewelry box when I opened the rusted metal door and was met with wide, black plastic eyes, staring from the shiny sockets of the woman's too pale face. Every time I'd open the door, she was closer, closer. But what choice did I have but to keep going down these stairs and pray I'd eventually find my way back to some semblance of normalcy? I staggered back as she inched closer, but my irrational panic had failed to account for the sudden descending staircase behind me. My heel slipped off the edge of the first step, and I barked a wordless shout as my balance dissolved and my stomach shot up into my throat. My flailing hand managed to grip the stair rail and slow my wild momentum. Instead of tipping backwards down the stairs and cracking my skull open, I went down in a graceless tumble of slipping feet and one grasping hand. I landed hard on my ass at the base of the stairs and smacked the back of my skull into what felt like a flimsy wooden door, and the world spun in swirls of black and gray. Blearily, I blinked the clouds from my eyes. I immediately regretted it. The woman had finally crossed the threshold and was creaking down the stairs. My blood turned to ice. Panicked, shaking, I felt for a door handle with my free hand, finding nothing but the smooth seams of a door fitting perfectly into its doorway. The stairwell was impossibly narrow. The woman, even slender as she was, couldn't descend without her slim shoulders brushing the smooth concrete walls. I had nowhere left to run. All I could do was watch, heart thudding painfully in my tightened throat, as the imperfectly perfect woman crept down the stairs with all the grace of a stop-motion doll. I tried to stand, using the door to prop me up, but my legs were shaking too hard to hold my weight. My lungs burned from cold as I gulped down panicked mouthfuls of air. The strange, doll-like woman approached until the toes of our shoes were touching. She crouched, and it looked wrong, her limbs bending slightly too far out of shape. Those big, glassy eyes were pinned on me, unblinking. She leaned closer, and the scent of her, metallic and sweet, like burnt sugar and melting plastic, invaded my nose and brought panic tears to my eyes. In that moment, I remember my terror overflowing so much that I almost felt numb. I watched as her long, spidery fingers reached out, noticing the most useless details like the smooth, creaseless skin of her pale white palms. Her hand pressed against my chest. Her nails caught on the chunky knit of my sweater, just enough to fray the yarn. I'm not sure what I expected. Horrific scenarios swarmed my mind, her white fingers digging beneath skin and bone and spurting fountains of blood, her glassy black eyes swallowing me whole. That plasticky sheen climbing my own skin and swallowing me whole. When her hand delicately clasped the silver jewelry box and tugged it from my trembling grip, all my panic and terror briefly gave way to pure and utter confusion. She cradled the jewelry box in the bow of her arm, like a swaddled infant. Her slender fingers peeled back the handwritten label in Miss Rutledge's curly script, folded it daintily in half, and offered it back to me. I blinked. My voice felt caught behind the sob still in my throat. Dude, you should have just tried to give her the box. Like, come on. Anyways, let's continue. Eventually, through several embarrassing voice cracks, I managed to ask, "You're Celeste?" She didn't respond. I'm not entirely convinced that she could have, even if she wanted to. Her plasticky joints creaked as she stood. Click, click, click. And she turned and began climbing the stairs with the same slow, jerky gait. I watched with my heartbeat hammering in my frigid fingertips as she disappeared through the doorway at the top, desperately trying to calm my frantic breathing. When my legs could support my weight, I stood and slid open the door at my back. It somehow led into the basement's narrow corridor. The moment I stepped through, the door slid shut, and was nothing but a perennially locked door once again. I wasted no time. I scrambled up the hallway and the glossy tiled staircase, nearly tripping over the delicate chain at the top of the stairs when my ankle caught the employees only sign. Mr. Callahan gave me an odd look when I stumbled past him and clambered up and over a haphazard stack of dining chairs, but I had no mind to be embarrassed by my frantic, clumsy behavior. Warmth was beginning to chase away my chill, and crooning jazz echoed through the shop, but I had to be sure that I was back where I was meant to be. My phone sat exactly where I had left it. When I tapped the screen, Puddles the street cat's gummy grin greeted me. Relief hit me like a truck. Wheezing from my retreating panic and from the first bout of proper exercise I'd had in a week, shameful as that is to admit, I slumped into my plush leather seat and collapsed head first on the desk. The hollow thunk of my skull against solid wood was almost comforting. "You okay?" Mr. Callahan's gruff voice rattled from the base of my spine to the nape of my neck. "You look, I shot up, plastering a customer service smile on my face. Wayward, sweat-damp strands of flyaway hair stuck every which way, and I self-consciously smoothed them down as best I could without a mirror. "I'm fine, Mr. Callahan," I said chipperly, before leaping from my seat so fast even the unflappable Mr. Callahan jerked back. "But I regret to inform you that Ruby's Antiques will be closing soon. Very soon. Right now, in fact." He opened his mouth. Maybe it wasn't exactly polite to interrupt him, but I ached with the need to leave this shop behind for the day. Or for the rest of the week. Possibly even the rest of April. Right now. "If you have any purchases you need processed?" I asked it futilely, knowing that Mr. Callahan never bought anything on his ventures into the shop. As expected, he shook his head. I stood on my toes to sweep my gaze across the shop, but I didn't notice any other customers, and they could find their own way out, were they so inclined. As I ushered Mr. Callahan out the door, into waning, reddish sunset, and the first true warmth I'd felt in hours, I checked the 2 missed texts from Miss Rutledge on my phone. 2:26 p.m. Remember, impeccable customer service never involves foul language. 6:07 p.m. Great job, sweetie. Celeste is so happy with her order. You've gained yourself a repeat customer for sure. I didn't return to Ruby's Antiques for 6 days following the aforementioned events. I might have stayed away longer, but I only get paid for the hours the shop is open. And while this job pays exceptionally well for a customer service gig, I'm still not that well off. I haven't had another special order in the month or so since this happened. And every text or call from Miss Rutledge sends a fresh wave of frigid dread down my spine. Maybe I'll ask Miss Rutledge to hire another employee. Surely if I had an underling, I could send them down into the basement to collect special orders, or in the rare cases when we need to access the water and electric. When she hired me, she told me her shop doesn't take kindly to most strangers, that the antiques liked my vibe, whatever the hell that means. One more stranger couldn't hurt, could it? I suppose I won't know until I ask. Yeah, in the beginning of this story, I really had no clue that this antique shop wasn't just going to be selling old items. It was really like the back rooms, and it was genuinely selling supernatural objects to supernatural people. As this story starts to unwind and you kind of get a taste for the odd rules of it, you somewhat find out what's really going on. But hey, if the pay's good enough, then why not? Anyways, here's the next one. It's from r/no sleep from user Bad Andy the Red. And guys, I can tell by the title this one's going to be nuts. I went camping with my girlfriend's family. Things were going fine until the blood sacrifice. Oh my gosh. It changed. Somehow, it all changed. I can't believe it, but I can't deny what I saw with my own eyes. Something happened here. Something impossible. Summer and her brother knew what it was. They called out to it, and something answered. I hoped it might have just been a fever dream, but now I have to reconcile the truth. It's all real. It's all here right now, and worst of all, it spoke to me. Just the other day, I was heading out on a camping trip with my girlfriend Summer. We had met at school. Both of us were taking the same environmental science course, and we hit it off. We started dating shortly after, and things had been going great. Before long, I was convinced I had met the girl of my dreams. She was so kind, thoughtful, funny, and beautiful. I was head over heels. When we discussed our families, I learned that hers was very enigmatic. I had not gotten to meet any of them yet, but she told me they were naturalists who owned land all across the state, including cabins and camping places around the Olympic Peninsula. She asked me if I'd like to go camping with her, to a place her family used to visit often. I was thrilled at the chance to spend more time with her, especially alone and in the majesty of nature. I was even considering using the opportunity to propose. We set out on the 3-hour drive to Leshy Ridge. The time spent driving was not quite as comfortable as I expected it to be. This was mainly because it was not just Summer and I going to the campsite. Her brother Sean was coming with us too. I was a little flustered when I found out, but Summer just smiled at me and said, "I can't say no to family. Come on, please. I promise it'll be worth it." I had given in and agreed, not wanting to disappoint her. I knew I would have to meet some of her family eventually, so I figured I could get to know her brother on this trip, even if I hadn't planned for it. Despite the discomfort of going camping with someone I had never met, I wanted to show Summer I could get along with her family. The drive was pleasant enough, if not a little awkward. Sean was very reserved and didn't respond with much beyond a grunt when I tried speaking with him. I tried to get him talking as we drove, but he shrugged and ignored me. Summer played it off and just smiled when I looked at her for reassurance. I let it go and kept driving. We started to ascend higher into the mountains, and the road began to vanish, replaced by rough rocks and dirt. It was strange, but as we moved, I thought I saw the green sheen of trees above us start to look oddly muted and colorless. I wondered if it was just an optical illusion from looking out beyond the skyline and near the sun. I blinked hard and focused on the road again. The winding path finally led to a small clearing with wide open space and a larger plateau looming overhead. The area was covered in grass and trees, though the same strange gray tinge lingered here as well. Before I could ask for confirmation, Summer shouted, "Here it is," she giggled, and before the van had fully stopped, she leapt out. She twirled around on a flourish, and Sean hopped out with a grunt and slammed the door. As the two embraced the energy of the area, I found myself a bit puzzled. They were acting like this was some great spot, but I had a hard time agreeing with the sentient. The trees looked oddly dull. The normal vibrant green hues seemed lost, like they'd forgotten that an evergreen was supposed to be just that. The lack of background sounds bothered me as well. The normal sounds of the forest were missing. It was desolate and barren. There was no birdsong to provide the normal pleasant backdrop of an area like this. The whole place just seemed like it was caught in a dead zone. I looked back at Summer and didn't say what I was thinking. I didn't want to say anything to offend her, since she had mentioned this place was important to their family. I just couldn't understand why. I tried to ignore my apprehension and distract myself by unloading the van. Summer approached me, likely suspecting my concern, and pulled me aside. "It means a lot to me that you're doing this. The camping trip might seem sudden, but it'll be worth the sacrifice." I know it might seem weird with Sean here, but this place. She paused and looked thoughtfully around before continuing. It's special. It means a lot to my family. I'd do anything to protect it and them. I'm just so happy you can be here with us now, to help us. She leaned in, kissed my cheek, and then went back to dancing around the campground. I was so happy to see her like that, dancing beautifully without a care in the world, that I didn't even consider the true meaning of her words. I finished unloading our stuff and was ready to get started on the tents. I asked Sean if he needed help with his, but he scoffed and just wandered off into the trees. I was about to call after him when Summer grabbed my arm. Just let him go. He likes to explore. Who knows, he might come back with a sunnier attitude. She smiled, and I couldn't tell if she really believed that or was just trying to placate me. I stopped worrying when she leaned in and kissed me, then whispered, "Set up the tent, and when Sean is asleep tonight, we might see what else we can do." She lingered for a moment before turning around, grabbing the cooler, and pulling out some supplies. "But for now, I'm gonna make us some lunch. Would you help grab some smaller kindling sticks so we can get a fire going and I can make us something?" I agreed and set out to find some. As I moved around the perimeter of the campground, I was struck by the eerie effect I had noticed earlier when we arrived. The only sound I could hear was the crunching of overly dry leaves and desiccated branches. The effect was unnerving, and I paused to listen more closely to a strange sound I thought I heard nearby. The sound had stopped, but I heard a voice then. I crept along a small trail further into a thicket overgrown with brittle blackberry vines. I saw Sean kneeling down on the ground in a small clearing. It seemed like he was talking to someone or something. "I don't know if I can do it. I've never done that before. I know Summer has, but I'm not like her. I know. I hear the family too. I just don't know." He paused and suddenly looked up from whatever he was talking to. I was too embarrassed to be caught snooping, so I dropped to my stomach and held still. I listened closely and heard Sean rise. I lifted my head just enough to see him looking in the other direction. He muttered something under his breath and started walking away, fortunately picking a different path than the one that would have led him right on top of me. When I was satisfied he was gone, I let out a deep breath. I didn't know who he was talking to, but the whole thing was strange. I collected a few of the dried out sticks I had trampled to get out of there and returned to camp. As I was helping Summer start the fire, I saw Sean had set up his tent and was inside it already. I considered the strange conversation he was having with himself. I thought at the time he must just be a bit eccentric. I shrugged it off and tried not to let the weird incident bother me. By then, the fire was going, and Summer had started grilling some bratwurst for us. I was starving and sat down in one of the chairs we had set around the fire and relaxed. With the soft crackling of the fire and the smell of the smoke, I was finally able to ignore the odd ambiance of the place and just enjoy myself. Just when I was finally relaxed, I heard a loud crunching noise from nearby. I looked over to the clearing by where the van was parked and couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was an animal, a raccoon by the shape and markings of its tail. However, that indication was all I had to go on, because the thing I saw standing there twitching unnaturally didn't look like any raccoon I had seen before. Its tail still had some fur and the telltale rings, but its upper body was a mangle of exposed muscle and soft tissue. It looked like it had been partially skinned, but was still moving around somehow. The flesh on its snout was peeled back, revealing a gruesome rictus of sharp teeth, and the eyes seemed horribly bloodshot. I paused for a long moment, just staring at the thing. I looked over at Summer, and she had spotted it as well. She was standing still, waiting to act. The small animal stepped forward, and its tail rose up high. It turned itself to a side profile and looked directly at us, hissing in a sound that was terrible with how unlike a normal raccoon it was. The thing looked half dead and rabid. I was afraid that in that moment it would just charge at us and start attacking. I slowly stood up and tried to put myself between it and Summer. I wanted us to get into our tents since the path to the van was blocked. The thing looked dangerous, and whatever it was afflicted with, I didn't want any of us to get. Before we could do anything else, the hideous raccoon turned to look at something in the distance. Then it hissed and ran off into the woods. In the next moment, it was gone, and I was trying to make sense of what had just happened. "What the hell was that?" I finally asked, breaking the silence. Summer let out a breath and relaxed, then shrugged apologetically. I don't know. I know a lot of them live in these woods, but that one looked worse than most. The illness brought on by pollution might be the cause. That's why my family's work is so critical. To help revive these places so that the creatures that live here can thrive. She gestured all around us and had an oddly serene look on her face, despite the encounter. She looked back at me and smiled apologetically. I'm sorry. I know you must be worried. If there are any more, we'll be prepared. I think Sean brought some deterrents. She went up to his tent and told him what happened. He emerged a moment later, holding a long rod which sparked at the end, and I realized it was some kind of cattle prod. In his other hand, he held a large hunting knife. Which way did the thing go? He asked with a more disturbing force of will than I had ever heard him use before. Summer tried to calm him down. It's okay, Sean. We don't need to go kill it. Just keep the prod handy in case it comes back to scare it off. Geez, calm down, she scoffed at him, and he looked disappointed. After a while, I finally calmed down when I was satisfied the deranged creature was gone. It was starting to get dark, and I stepped away to take a leak. I was still close enough to hear Summer and Sean talking about something. I didn't want to pry, but I overheard bits of what she was saying to him. Come on, Sean. I know you don't like it out here, but it gets better. I'm sorry you feel that way, but it's for the family. The conversation grew quiet, and I finished up. At the time, I thought that Summer was trying to encourage her brother. Eventually, when it was near full dark, I was ready to call it a day. Summer emerged from the tent, wearing her hiking gear. I was confused and asked her what was going on. She grinned back at me and said, "The stars are so bright out tonight. It would be amazing to see them from the lookout. There's a small plateau just up there, only a 10-minute hike. Come on, I know it's dark, but it'll be worth it. I promise." Before I could ask why at night or if Sean would be coming too, Sean unzipped his tent and walked out, holding his cattle prod and a flashlight, with the large knife tucked into a vest pocket. Summer was rummaging in her bag and produced an antique lantern I had never seen before. She lit it reverently, and the intricate shapes carved into the sides cast luminous shapes across the campground. The light show distracted me from my concern about venturing off into the dark, and I followed her out of camp. "Come on, let's go to the lookout," she called out and began to sing. The moon is shining bright, and the stars glow in our hair. The nighttime's music's magic, and their spirits in the air. The forest trees will guide our way, imperious and tall, to lead the way on path and trail to answer family's call. Summer kept dancing and singing, swinging the lantern in arcs that shone its warm light on the few shadowy spots untouched by the bright moonlight. We walked on, and I found out from Summer that this hike at night was another family tradition. I had concerns, but I figured she knew this place pretty well, so I felt a bit better about heading up to the lookout in the middle of the night. As we walked, I saw she was right about the stars. They burned brilliantly above, and the serene backdrop removed the subtle aura of decay that this place had in the daytime. I started to feel a bit more optimistic about the trip. I saw something odd in the distance, about 100 feet from the small area where the climb to the lookout was. It looked like a small house or cabin. I called it out as we walked. "Hey, what's that building?" Sean and Summer both paused, and Sean aimed a light towards the structure. To my surprise, he answered me. It's just the old family cabin. No one has stayed there recently. It's pretty run down, but hopefully it'll be made whole again. Our family used to stay there all the time. Maybe they can again soon. Come on." He waved me on, and as we passed the cabin more closely, I saw it was in ruins. The ceiling had collapsed in places, and the wood was rotted and decayed all over. It was a wreck, and I figured they would have to do some serious renovation before any of their family members would be living there again anytime soon. As I looked at it, I felt something strange. The building felt wrong somehow, like it shouldn't be there at all. The entire place held an intangibly ancient quality. I suddenly felt very nervous about camping so close to it. I was about to say something to Summer, but she put an arm around me and leaned her head on my shoulder and guided me along the path to the lookout, leaving my questions unanswered. We made it up the incline to the plateau, and I was impressed by the cloudless sky and shining stars above. I could see why this place was so special to their family, and for a short time, I was grateful that they had included me in this tradition. If Sean had not been there, I would have considered proposing to Summer, but I never expected what happened next. Summer reverently cradled the lantern and was using a small piece of chalk to draw lines on the ground while singing something. It was odd at first. I thought it was another song, but it had low tones and rhythms that were more like a chant. Sean had not moved onto the plateau. He just stood by the trail leading back down. He was holding the cattle prod and the knife now. He seemed to have an anguished look on his face, like something bad had just happened. Ooh, buddy, I got a feeling something bad is about to happen. I was confused by what was going on, and then Summer spoke. O great spirit that dwells in this place, we supplicate ourselves to you. We offer you the lifeblood and vitality of humanity, so that you may continue to bless us and watch over this sacred place and our family. Eternal peace for this place, eternal peace to the offering. You have been chosen to become one with this place, to become family. Blessed be. She had finished drawing the strange markings on the ground and looked up at me solemnly. I'm so sorry. I really did care for you, but this place, this sacred land, we need to take care of it. Look around us. It's dying. Only an offering can restore the vitality that was lost. You have to understand. Please don't resist. Okay, guys, so I take it we're all on the same page here on we are booking it into the woods, and even if we run into the creepy skinned raccoon thing again, it's still better than being around these people. Anyways, let's continue. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I finally snapped out of the shock paralysis I was in and responded. Wait, Summer, what the hell is this? Some type of cult ritual? You guys can't be serious. You're just pranking me, right? It has to be. I asked with a slight laugh to try and see how they reacted. Summer's face was still grave, and Sean had walked closer to us. His hands gripping the weapon so tightly I could see his knuckles turning white. No, stay back, I shouted out vainly as Summer just nodded while looking past me and at Sean. Strike true, for the Sylvian, for the family. Don't hesitate, she shouted. I turned back to see Sean moving toward me at speed. He held out the prod and it sparked to life. Don't struggle, this can all be over soon, he said with a hesitant mixture of fear and aggression. I held out a hand and tried to discourage him, but he pressed on, and I leapt back and suffered a shock as the prod made contact with me. He lunged forward, and I fell back, dodging a clumsy stab with the knife. Summer was standing still, watching us and chanting quietly. I felt numbing pain, and my body convulsed as the prod was driven into my ribs. The pain was excruciating, but it didn't hold me as long as a proper taser might have. I saw the reluctance in Sean's eyes, and he actually closed them while stabbing the knife down at me. I was able to regain enough motion to roll away, and when the knife crashed down onto the ground, I leaned back and kicked him hard in the face. Sean went flying, and I heard the satisfying sound of his face crunching and a tooth flying. Summer stopped chanting and gasped, as if she was surprised I had resisted. I turned back to her and saw a look of contempt on her face. You need to stop, she shouted indignantly. Can't you see what has happened to this place? It needs to be reinfused with life. You can be that life. You can save us all. She lunged forward and tried to grapple me. I pushed her away just in time to avoid a stab by Sean, who had recovered. I saw he had dropped the cattle prod, and I dove forward to collect it before either of them could. When he lunged again, I stabbed the prod out and struck his neck. He fell forward and dropped the knife again. I bent down to collect it, but Summer kicked out hard and struck me in the side. I rolled over and tried to get up, but my head was struck by a hard stomp. I nearly passed out from the impact. I had to move. I knew I was in trouble. I saw Sean looming over me. He spat out some blood, and the reservation on his face from earlier was gone. Nothing but anger remained. Summer was getting up and moving out of the way to give him a clear shot. As he prepared to stab the knife down, I aimed the prod at Summer's leg, and the shock caused her to collapse on top of me. There was a terrible moment where I heard the slicing sound of flesh and knew someone had been stabbed. I felt nothing but the pain of the wind being knocked out of me. I looked up to see Summer. Her eyes were wide and pleading. We both looked down to see the blossoming blood stain on her, and I looked past her to see Sean holding the knife with a look of shocked horror. He had stabbed her in the back. He backed away and began crying. Summer rolled off of me, and I scrambled away and stood up. I looked around and saw the odd drawings of the ground begin to glow. and Summer's blood seemed to be absorbed by all the impossible characters. I was stunned, but was reminded of the danger when I regarded Sean. I held out a hand and tried to control the situation, though I did not really think he would just listen to me. Sean was pulling his hair and hyperventilating. He looked seconds away from a mental breakdown. "Sean," I said as calmly as I could muster, "you don't have to do this. I know you're scared, but I think you were forced here, right?" I asked, trying to sound as empathetic as possible. He just shook his head, and the look of fear faded away to reveal a snarl of unsuppressed rage. "You," he murmured, and then his voice grew louder. "You killed her. It's your fault. You should have just stayed down and died. We need to bring this place back. You need to die." He charged at me like a rabid animal, and when I tried to hold the prod out to stop him, it did nothing. He barreled on and took me down in a clumsy tackle. I rolled along with him to try to take the weapon, but we rolled too far, and we both launched off the edge of the plateau. I should have died from that fall. I still don't know how I didn't. I remember falling, but I ended up landing on some type of natural outcropping and just rattling my bones. Sean fell down much further, though all I really remember was the blood-curdling scream as he did. I woke up in a haze, and I could barely move. I think I had a concussion from the force. I hit my head when I landed, but I was just grateful to be alive. It was daytime, and I didn't know how long I'd been out. I was incredibly thirsty and felt dehydrated and sallow, so it might have been for hours, if not days. I managed to find a steep path that led back down to the main trail. I had to get out of there and get help. I hustled back to the campground and passed a disturbing sight. There were faded bloodstains on the ground and a human outline in the dirt near where Sean would have landed, but nobody was there. I shuddered at the thought that he might still be out there hunting me, but he couldn't have survived that fall. Then I noticed the odd emergence of a large root cluster that seemed to crowd around the imprint his body had left. It seemed like they were surging and lapping at something, like they had a terrible sentience I could not guess. I shuddered when I stared at the morbid sight. I suddenly felt sure that Sean was really dead. I shambled along through the forest, and when I got back to the campground, I was stunned. The entire area seemed healthy now. It was all green and vibrant. I could hear birds singing. Animals moved all throughout the woods, and the gray pallor was gone. Just the other day, the place looked like a dead zone, but now it was alive again. I was about to leave when a nagging thought made me stay. I walked off in a daze, wandering from the campground. I let out an exhausted laugh as I considered the insanity I had just witnessed. I had planned to stay there with the girl I loved, only to have seen her die after trying to kill me. And now there I was, wandering, half dead in the woods that were so important to her family, alive and well, just like my surroundings. I marched on, up the trail into the plateau. I looked out over the forest and saw the same as before. Dried blood where Summer had fallen, but no body. The strange markings on the ground were gone, and I stood there in confused horror, trying to make sense of what had happened. Suddenly, I felt a strange breeze that carried across the area. In the rush of air, I thought I heard an odd tune as it swept over me. A tune I had heard sung for the first time by Summer when we walked under the stars. But the strangest part was that the more I listened, the more it sounded like her. I shuddered and left that place, running back down the trail to try to leave. I ran on, but my pace slackened when I saw the family cabin and couldn't believe my eyes. The wrecked building was restored somehow. It looked brand new. I inched closer and rubbed my eyes, unable to believe what I was seeing. As I looked over the impossible change, I felt a chilling presence pervade the area, and the door creaked open. There was a light inside, shining just beyond the corner of the now open door. I heard a familiar voice creep into my ear from everywhere and nowhere. "Come inside, join the family, and stay with us, forever." My stupor broke, and I ran. I ran madly out of that impossible forest, leaving Summer, her brother, and the entire nightmare behind me. I don't know what really happened to them. They must have died, but where had the bodies gone? Then I remembered Summer's words, her pledge to the spirits. Human blood to renew that sacred place. The site had gotten its blood. just not mine. It was definitely beautiful for now, but I'll never go back there. I'm going to tell the police about what happened, and hopefully they won't arrest me for murder. Someone needs to know, someone needs to be warned, that the family is still there. This could have been a very cool and normal story about camping. It could have been made creepy in another way. But no, the OP's girlfriend wants to sacrifice him to be eaten by the woods. These authors nowadays, these Reddit authors, just creative. Way too creative. The next one's from r/nosleep from user Unalloyed St. Trina. They came from nowhere and dragged away half the town in a single night. I'm terrified one night that they'll decide to take us too. There was no warning, no deafening noise, no brilliant flash of light. They all just appeared, hunched over, emaciated, and covered in translucent, pale red skin. Only those who stayed indoors lived to see the desert sun rise. We call it the dead tide. I was 16 when it first rolled into White Rock. I dream about that night a lot. Mom had just pulled into the driveway. Twilight faded overhead, drip by golden drip. Dad waved at her through the foyer window. She smiled, shut the trunk, gathered the groceries, and began walking towards the front door. She was so close, just a few steps away. The sun fully set. Instantly, they were there. Men, women, even children. I witnessed at least a dozen of them blink into existence on my street, but they had materialized all over town. Dad mumbled some meaningless half-words. I placed my trembling hand on the window. The glass was cold, but alive, crackling with the phantom caress of static. The closest one stood motionless in the middle of the street. Ribs jutted from his clay-colored chest. The oily brown hair blanketing his upper back was tangled like a thorn bush. His eyes were gray and downcast, perpetually fixed on the sand between his gaunt feet. Then, while the rest of him stayed perfectly still, the first two fingers of his right hand began suddenly elongating, launching across the asphalt with impossible speed. Mom dropped the groceries and started to run. My pulse grew wild. Each frantic heartbeat seemed to rattle my teeth. I beckoned to her, wailed for her to run faster, but she wasn't looking. She couldn't seem to hear me. The fingers coiled up her back, curved around her neck, and latched onto her cheek, pinching her skin between a pair of long, jaundiced fingernails, the sickly fangs of a hellish viper. Her expression twisted into something feral, a raw, animalistic contortion of lips and creases. Her gaping mouth rippled, but I heard no scream. Then, like a fishing line being reeled in, the fingers retracted. The force ripped her off her feet. She was briefly airborne. Her hip crashed against the sidewalk, but I heard no painful thump, no shattering of bone, nothing at all. Because the silence never wavers once the sun sets. That's how we came up with its name. It's an invisible current that surges through our town, swallowing everything in its path, silencing anything caught under its swell. A dead tide. Mom was dragged with such reckless effort, her body skidding across the road, and yet her skin never broke. No, her cheek stretched. Once at his side, she hung from the man's grasp like a burlap sack, her cheek skin stretching almost a foot above her jawbone. Her eyes vanished within the tinted skin, leaving a pair of black eye holes that made her face look like an empty mask. Being caught in the tide changes a person. Their skin becomes elastic, and they can't seem to bleed, no matter how roughly they're handled. Tears streamed down my cheek. The way she thrashed, the helpless ferocity of it all, it was just too much. I burst from the window and bolted towards the front door. Dad was too quick. He dashed ahead of me and barricaded the door with his body. I battered him, screamed at him to do something while slamming clenched fists into his stomach. Begged him to let me through. Eventually, exhaustion set in. I slumped to the floor and fell asleep in his arms. And while I slept, the dead tide rolled on. Dad stayed awake and watched it unfold. The pale red bodies dragged their writhing victims due south under the moonlight. They lurched together in perfect lockstep, a silent, synchronized convoy disappearing into the horizon with its human cargo. Dawn arrived. Sound made an unceremonious return. A strong wind howled across the vacant streets, lifting coils of sand from the asphalt. Far as anyone could tell, they were gone. The town was still. Everyone was desperate to leave, but no one was brave enough to be the first. Our neighbor's door slowly creaked open. Lily inched over the threshold, glassy-eyed, still in her pajamas, the navy blue ones with the cartoon circus lines on them. A few strands of frizzy brown hair hung in the air like someone had just rubbed a balloon against her head. She called out to her parents, who were both long gone by then. Jim and Denise were Mom's best friends, and Lily was a sweet, energetic girl. We knew them all very well. Everyone watched as he trudged across the asphalt, alone, confused, frightened, but unharmed. The dead tide hadn't hesitated to take children the night before. That was enough proof. Like someone had fired a starter pistol, people exploded from their homes all at once. Wild-eyed parents ushered startled toddlers into vans. The more religiously inclined fell to their knees in the street and offered clasped hands to the sky, pleading for mercy, apologizing for whatever transgression had warranted such a biblical massacre. Dad sprang into action. He leapt out the door, pushing through the mob, scooped Lily into his arms, brought her inside, and told me to keep an eye on her. We watched TV on the couch while he went back out and tried to control the hysteria. "We can't just leave," I heard him shout. "There have to be others like Lily. Kids, old people, the sick. Not everyone can get out of town right this second, and nobody knows for sure they're not coming back." Some listened, but most of those who could leave were leaving. Come hell or high water, though, they promised to send help when they reached Tucson. When all was said and done, only a quarter of the town remained. As the sun dipped in the sky, we fortified our locked doors with bookcases and heavy tables. A futile measure, but it gave us something to do. Right as the sun fully set, the dead tide rolled in. The red bodies materialized and lurched silently through the streets. They migrated south exactly as they had done the night before, eyes at their feet, never looking up, never attempting to gain entry to anyone's home. Dad's relief was palpable, but short-lived. Although I'm thankful for his attention to detail, his discovery was devastating. Some small part of me wishes he had never noticed. The procession was slightly larger. They were there, all of them. Everyone who had evacuated earlier that day was now walking amongst them, clay-skinned, starved, and hollow. But Mom was nowhere to be seen. The following morning, I woke up to find Dad on the couch. He was staring out the window, gently rubbing the back of a snoring Lily. I approached him carefully. There was a cold emptiness in his bloodshot eyes that set me on edge. "Glad you're up," he said, gaze still anchored to the glass. "I'll be leaving in a bit to organize a meeting. You'll stay here and look after Lily." "What? No, I can help. I need to help." His shoulders tensed, but he didn't respond. Heat collected in the pit of my stomach. Why the hell would I stay? Just for her? She's not... His head snapped towards me. The coldness melted away, revealing something truly volcanic. "She's not what, Adam?" I considered keeping my mouth shut. I didn't. She's not ours," I shouted. The proclamation echoed through our home. Movement drew attention away from Dad. A single blue eye peeked out from the kid's chestnut curls. She sniffled, and my stomach twisted. The couch leather squeaked as she rotated herself away. Lily nestled against the cushion, pushing her face into the back of the couch like she was attempting to burrow inside the fabric. Dad sighed. He stood, tucking the fleece blanket around her before turning back to me. "Listen, there is no ours and yours. There's just us. We're all one big, unified thing. Caring for her is just another way of caring for all of us." I nodded. A bitter smile crept across his lips. He was about to pass by, but he paused. His breaths were heavy. "You know what? I think Mom taught me that." Dad and the other survivors convened in a small amphitheater where stage plays had been performed before the tide. After some deliberation, everyone agreed that the most logical next step was to involve some outside authorities. We'd lost our chief of police that first night, as well as a sizable chunk of our officers, but the few who remained knew the proper channels to contact the Tucson PD. I mean, who knows? Might end up being overkill. someone outside of White Rock must have noticed people are missing. There was a brightness in his voice, a tenuous optimism. I clung to it. The sun set. The tide rolled in. For a while, the night was silent. I woke up to a series of piercing screams erupting from the guest bedroom. Lily was having a night terror, the first of many. I threw a pillow over my head, but it barely muffled her shrieks. Fear gnawed at my chest, lacerating throbs of pain, like my heart was pumping fiberglass instead of blood. Would the noise alert them? I imagined those fingers bursting into my bedroom and dragging me away with those sickly yellow nails. I considered what it might feel like to have my skin stretched like rubber, expanding until I eventually disappeared inside myself. But they never came, and with Dad's help, Lily settled. The following afternoon, Detective Wilms arrived at our doorstep. He was a thick man with a shit attitude and bagel crumbs adorning his unkempt mutton chops. Given his level head, it was determined that Dad would speak to the detective. He vastly undersold the circumstances, of course. All he said was that Mom and a few others had gone missing. From there, he just had to keep Wilms preoccupied until sunset. Nobody was sure what would happen after Wilms saw the dead tide. For all we knew, reports of the preternatural threat would rise through the ranks of the FBI, and White Rock would be swiftly nuked off the face of the earth in the name of containment. Even that seemed better than doing nothing, though. But Wilms proved difficult to pin down. He seemed firmly uninterested in the situation. Eyes glazed over, expression vacant, memory worse than a concussed goldfish. Despite reiterating our cover story multiple times, he kept asking questions like, "Wait, so who went missing?" The sky darkened. The scent of vanilla and burnt wood hung heavy in the foyer. Dad and Wilm stood by the window, debating who should be drafted to the Arizona Cardinals over tumblers of expensive scotch. The sun finally set. The tide rolled in. Sweat beaded on Dad's forehead. Silence descended around us like an avalanche. Wilms stared into the blackness, a blackness littered with shambling red corpses. We waited, and then he smiled. He patted his bulging gut and said, "Well, I should probably ship off. Thanks for the drink." The color dissolved from Dad's shell-shocked face. Wilms couldn't see the tide. Sidebar here, guys. Wilms better be rage-baiting right now. Because if red, stretchy corpses are walking the street and he's like, I appreciate the drinks. I'll catch y'all later. Yeah, no, that's not okay. Anyways, let's continue. And before Dad even realized the danger, Wilms already had his hand on the knob. He flung the front door open. The smell of a storm wafted in from the night, dense and electric. Dad leapt back, throwing his arms up defensively, expecting an onslaught, but nothing came through the door. Halfway through the threshold, Wilms paused, cocking his head. I'll get back to you about," he thought for a moment, eyes darting around the room, "what we, discussed today." The door slammed shut. Wilms stumbled to his car, got in, and drove off. He almost hit one of the red bodies, but at the last possible moment, they launched back, flattened themselves onto the road, and narrowed their frame. The car sped right over them. A second later, they jerked upright and continued trudging south. We never saw Wilms again. Time, much like the tide, proved relentless and indifferent. Despite feeling frozen at the epicenter of some quiet apocalypse, the minutes still ticked forward. Day turned to night, night turned to day, life went on, so eventually we did too. Lily moved in with us and became my unofficial stepsister. Dad continued to help coordinate survival efforts, and the town as a whole abandoned the notion that anyone on the outside could help us. Dad spoke with Wilms on the phone a few days after his visit. He had no recollection of White Rock, none at all, and when he finally convinced Wilms to come back a second time, the detective claimed he couldn't figure out how to get there. Dad pleaded for him to elaborate, but he got flustered and hung up. Friends and relatives were much the same. We couldn't reach them by telephone. They'd remember us, but that memory would quickly turn out to be both vague and fleeting. One moment they'd understand who they were talking to, the next they'd have no fucking clue. And more often than not, that amnesia evoked some disturbing rage. Calls would frequently end with the person on the other line blaring profanities, sobbing uncontrollably, or screaming like a banshee. It was like we were on the precipice of complete erasure, but we hadn't been pushed over the edge yet, and that in-betweenness seemed to incite a primal fear for those outside of White Rock. A strange new normal developed while we waited for the tide to finally pass. Lily and I grew close. Memories were made. Peaceful dinners with weak laughter. Pleasant soccer games under the Arizona sun. Movie nights with blinds hanging low on every window. Things certainly weren't perfect. The tide wore on everyone's psyche differently. Some freely gave themselves to it, left their homes in the night, silently and usually without warning, never to be seen again. Didn't happen often, but it happened enough times to earn a slang term. It was a clumsy euphemism, but most felt it was more appropriate for polite conversation than stating the blunt truth of the matter. "Oh, you haven't heard about Mary? Couldn't take it anymore. She got sunk." Lily's night terrors became progressively more intense. Sometimes they'd last for hours. Other times she'd make these bizarre noises, rhythmic clicks and grunts that would turn her cheeks red from how vigorously she would vocalize. Hundreds of nights came and went without incident. There was never any siege, and as long as people remained inside, nobody was harmed. Call me naive, but the phenomenon started to seem more like a natural disaster than an apocalypse. We were just in the wrong place at the wrong time and got swept up into something we could never understand. 2 years later, and we're still here. Not much has really changed. Until tonight. Dad was lounging on the couch with a book. Lily tends to get a little stir-crazy before bed, so I was doing my best to wear her down. She loves playing the flying trapeze. "Okay, now cross the tightrope," I called out. She tiptoed across a line of ties I'd laid on the floor, wobbling, feigning nervousness. Being the rambunctious little goblin she is, Lily pretended to slip from the tightrope, and she came crashing to the floor. After I tended to her fake injuries, she deemed herself ready to return to circus life, which involved her doing manic cartwheels around the living room. I smiled, cheering her on. There was a rush of emotion behind me. Dad leaned over and whispered something in my ear. "Get your sister upstairs, now." I turned to him. A familiar emptiness had hollowed out his bloodshot eyes, but he wasn't looking at me. Nausea skittered up the back of my throat. Despite the painful apprehension, I followed his gaze. He was staring out the window. The red bodies were marching due south in perfect lockstep, same as they had every other night, but with one key difference. Their eyes weren't fixed on the ground. Their heads were upright, and they were shifting side to side, still in absolute synchrony with each other. Left to right, right to left, left to right. Air fled violently from my lungs. "Jesus Christ," I muttered. "Don't think about it. Just go, and try to act calm. I'll start barricading the doors." I staggered to my feet. All right, kiddo, time for bed." Lily tumbled out of a cartwheel, panting from exertion. Did you see how many I did?" I nodded, grabbed her hand, and guided her up the stairs, careful to keep her pointed away from the window. Much as I tried not to look, I could still see them in the corners of my vision. Their starved red bodies marched down the street, but their ravenous gray pupils followed Lily's every movement, even when she was upstairs, away from any windows. And if you looked really, really closely, you could see their fingers vibrating in the moonlight. We're not gone. We're all still out here, and the tide's shifting. Please, for the love of God, remember us. In my professional Reddit story reading opinion, the scariest part of this one wasn't even the creatures that were dragging people away. It was realizing that this town is completely cut off from the rest of the world, and nobody's ever going to come save them. Like, they're genuinely cooked. Anyways, that's all the scary Reddit stories and Minecraft I have for you today. If you enjoy videos like this, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe. Go check out my main channel, Droven without the 2, as I upload on there every other day as well. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching. Peace.